Chapter 1. The sun and moon had just arrived. It wasn't the 8th day of winter yet, but the weather was gradually getting colder. Even the pots of old Madam's favorite chrysanthemums that were placed along the corridor of the Prime Minister's foo were slightly wilting. Something big had happened in the foo, so the servants had no time to take care of it. The chrysanthemums were left standing proudly alone. Mammy Chin rubbed her hands and quickly walked into Ci Shao Garden. She walked through the hall and stepped on the bluestone and square brick paved path. She hurriedly walked all the way to the main room. Her dark green cotton cloak spread out behind her in a fan shape because of her hurry. When she reached the corridor, a young maidservant who hadn't yet grown her hair politely held a brass hand warmer with her hands. "Mammy Chin is back." And Mammy Chin raised her eyes and glanced at the young maidservant. The young maidservant immediately withdrew. Outside the main room, the dark green curtain embroidered with happiness and longevity was lifted. It was the head maidservant Ji Xiang who came out to greet them. When she saw Mammy Chin, Ji Xiang hurriedly pulled her to the side and whispered, "Old Madam is feeling better now. The maidservants are chatting with her." Mammy Chin rubbed her cold hands on the hand warmer and asked in a low voice, "Is the first foreign here right now?" Ji Xiang shook her head and pointed in the direction of Xingning Garden with her fair finger, making a tearful gesture. "Second Madam and Third Madam are both in Xingning Garden, trying to persuade her." She then asked seriously, "Has Lord brought her back?" Mammy Chin nodded with a grave expression. This time, even Ji Xiang's expression changed subtly. The two lifted the curtain and entered the room. They put the hand warmer on the round mahogany table in the corner of the outer room. Mammy Chin patted her cold and stiff face and squeezed out a moderate smile. Then, she quickly walked around the black screen with the words, "Happiness" on the plum tree, and went to the side hall. Compared to the outdoor room, the side hall that old Madam usually used for banquets was as warm as spring. The sunlight shone in through the lattice window pasted with gaoli paper, coating all the exquisite mahogany carvings and decorations in the room with a layer of soft light. The chairs were covered with light green brocade, and the floor was covered with a soft carpet from Persia with beautiful blooming flowers. There was a charcoal brazier placed in the middle of the floor. Inside the brazier, high-quality silver charcoal had been burned long ago. Two young married women were sitting beside the brazier to warm themselves. There were also 5 charming young girls standing or sitting around a mahogany carved luohan bed placed by the window. The old Madam was wearing a tea-colored golden cloud brocade with a button-up collar. On her head, she was wearing a brocade headband inlaid with jadeite of the same color. A large hairpin inlaid with gold and jadeite was inserted diagonally. She was sitting cross-legged on the arhat bed. Behind her, she was leaning against a light green big pillow. She was talking to a delicate and pretty young girl who was wearing a light blue robe. Her expression was very loving, no different from the past. Mammy Chin felt awestruck. Fourth young lady was really the most favored. Even after such a big thing happened, her weight in old Madam's heart didn't decrease at all. "Old Madam," Mammy Chin saluted. Everyone in the room fell silent at the same time. They all looked at her with different expressions. The old Madam's face darkened. In a deep voice, she asked, "She has returned?" Mammy Chin carefully lowered her head and bowed. "Yes, this servant was at the second gate when I heard someone pass on the message that eldest master, second master, eldest master, and second master had brought a new young lady into sect. This servant hurriedly came back to report to you." The old Madam's frown deepened. "Did you see what kind of person she was?" Without waiting for Mammy Chin's reply, she coldly said, "Why did you say that she was a young lady from our foo? Our sister Hui has been raised for 14 years. I hold her in the palm of my hand and dote on her like a pearl or a treasure. How did she change from my biological granddaughter to a fake granddaughter?" As soon as she finished speaking, the blue-clothed young girl sitting next to the old Madam sobbed again. The old Madam sighed. She pulled the blue-clothed young girl's hand and coaxed, "Sister Hui, don't cry. Your crying is breaking grandmother's heart." Qin Huaining sobbed as she approached the old Madam. Tears hung from her cheeks. Her pair of bright almond eyes had long swollen into walnuts from crying. "Grandmother, granddaughter has received your love for so many years in vain. Granddaughter has wronged you and the family, Qin. How can granddaughter be fake? How can granddaughter be fake? With her crying complaint, the room became so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. The young ladies all looked at the old madam in unison. The old madam couldn't bear to see the only granddaughter of the eldest branch shed tears. She hugged Qin Huaining and cried out, "Don't be sad. No one dares to call you out. You grew up under my watch. How can you not be your parents' biological child? There's no guarantee that you will bring back a bastard child who is scheming to climb up the ladder of riches and honor. No matter what, grandmother wants you and likes you." Grandmother! Qin Huaining knelt in front of the old madam emotionally. She hugged the old madam's legs and leaned her tear-stained face on the old madam's knees. No matter what, as long as the old madam was willing to dote on her, she was still the daughter of the eldest branch. The old madam wore a jade ring. Her wrinkled hand stroked Qin Huaining's head. This scene was so heartwarming. How could the bystanders not understand? The young ladies of the second and third branches were all moved and shed a few tears. Old madam, first old master, second old master, first old master, and second old master have returned. Outside the door, the young girl's voice was very crisp. As the warm curtains were lifted, a gust of cold wind poured in. Everyone craned their necks to look outside. They saw first old master, second old master, first old master, and second old master come in one after another around the screen. Behind them was a tall young girl with beautiful eyes. Seeing her, everyone's eyes couldn't help but light up. The young girl was around 13 or 14 years old. She was wearing a new set of light yellow clothes with a plain face and floral makeup. Her gait was light and graceful as she walked. Although her figure was thin, there was a kind of temperament in her bones. Her raven black hair was combed into 2 flat buns and secured with 2 light yellow satin ribbons. She didn't wear any makeup on her face. Her cherry lips were slightly pale. Her willowy eyebrows reached her temples, and her almond-shaped eyes were sparkling. Her appearance was 70% similar to the family Qin's first old master, Qin Huaiyuan, when he was young. Obviously, the young girl didn't often see the family Qin. At this time, her head was slightly lowered. Although she was quiet and serene, she was also somewhat timid and uneasy. Looking at her, she made people feel even more pity for her. Family Qin produced beauties. Qin Huaiyuan was an outstanding talent among his peers. When he was young, he was listed as the head of the 4 gentlemen of the capital. Many young ladies flocked to him. If he were to ride a carriage around the city, he would definitely fill the carriage with flowers and fruits. He was knowledgeable and unparalleled in strategy. At the age of 23, he used a scheme to drive a wedge between the enemy country's protector general, Zhong Zhongjing, and caused the country of Beiji to fall into chaos and gradually perish. Since then, his official career had been meteoric. Today, he was already the prime minister of Dian. Although Beiji had changed its dynasty to Dezhou, and the son of the protector general, Zhong Zhongjing, had killed his way into Dian and was about to enter the capital, Qin Huaiyuan's talent and appearance were still well known. In the past few years, there had been a story in the tea house about Wise Panan's clever scheme to get rid of evil generals. The appearance and character of the young lady in front of them were remarkably similar to the Wise Pana when he was young. They didn't need to investigate to confirm that this was definitely Qin Huaiyuan's biological daughter. However, if she was Qin Huaiyuan's legitimate daughter, then who was Qin Huaining, who had been raised by the eldest son's wife for 14 years? Everyone's gaze couldn't help but shift back and forth between Qin Huaining and the young lady. Qin Huaining's face turned purple. Old madam curled her lips. While patting Qin Huaining's hand to appease him, she sized up the young lady in front of her with a critical look. Although she was dressed appropriately, she didn't even dare to raise her eyebrows. She looked like a country bumpkin who hadn't seen the world before entering the city. Other than looking like her eldest son, she really didn't have the demeanor that a legitimate daughter of an aristocratic family should have. Sister Hui, who had been raised in front of her, was still better. Old madam tightened her grip on Qin Huaining's hand, bringing her infinite comfort. Mother, greetings. Qin Huaiyuan, second master Qin Shuyuan, eldest master Qin Yu, and second master Qin Han all saluted old madam. Old madam waved her hand faintly. Get up. Her eyes were still fixed on the young lady. Sister E, why haven't you kowtowed to your grandmother? Qin Huayuan said coldly. Sister E? Old Madam raised her eyebrows. Yes, mother. These years, she only has a nickname outside. This son has given her a formal name, Yining. After saying this, he glared at the young lady who was still foolishly staring at him. After all, she had grown up in a wild mountain village. She had no knowledge, no rules, and was a blockhead. The young lady pursed her cherry lips and recalled the etiquette that her cousin, Qin Han, had taught her at the inn. She obediently knelt down and saluted. Granddaughter greets grandmother. Her voice was like a new oriole leaving the valley, very pleasant to the ears. Old Madam cast a sidelong glance at her, barely passing the test. She lightly snorted. Now you're called Yining? Then what was your previous name? Grandmother, my previous name was Shaoxi. Why did you have such a name? Because my adoptive mother picked me up from Shaoxi and brought me home, so I was called Shaoxi. Hearing this, everyone had different thoughts. Some were mocking her, while others were sighing. Qin Huayuan tightly clenched his fists, but his expression showed that he couldn't bear to see her like this. Qin Han sighed with pity. He really pitied this cousin of his who had been through a rough life since she was a child. However, Old Madam laughed mockingly. You call something you picked up by a stream little stream? If you were picked up from a dog kennel, wouldn't you be called a dog? Ignorant people don't even know how to give a name. I think you shouldn't be called Yining. You don't deserve to be called Yining. You should still be called Shaoxi. Everyone was silent. Qin Yining raised his head and looked at Old Madam in astonishment. It seemed that this family didn't welcome her. This grandmother was especially displeased with her. That's right. She heard that the concubines of the wealthy families in the city would secretly fight for a long time over a small hole in the winter. Now that she had been found by her biological father, she must have taken someone's position and been an eyesore to someone. Actually, she felt that Shaoxi was better. However, she was originally the daughter of the family Qin. Why should she give up what should belong to her to someone else? Was it her fault that she was swapped away by her father's political enemy? Shouldn't she go home after surviving so hard? Old Madam felt inexplicably uncomfortable under her clear and bright almond-shaped eyes. She said coldly, I heard that you have been hiding alone in the deep mountains all these years? Yes. Qin Yining lowered his eyes again. Why did you think of going up the mountains? Because of the war, the people in the city had no way to make a living. Many people who profited from the country's disaster abducted people and sold them. After my adoptive mother died, I was afraid that I would be abducted and sold, so I went up the mountains alone. Liang City was located at the border between the two countries. The flames of war had not stopped for more than 10 years. 9 out of 10 houses were already empty. Chapter 2. There was dead silence in the side hall. The air seemed to have solidified because of Old Madam's displeasure. The servants kept quiet out of fear. Mammy Qin, Jixiang, and the other senior maidservants retreated to the outer room and didn't dare to breathe loudly. Qin Yining, who was kneeling on the floor, raised her eyes to look at Old Madam and slowly said, It was my adoptive mother who told me to hide before she died. She said that if someone like me was sold, it would be over for the rest of my life. It would be better to be eaten by a wild beast and still be clean. This sentence contained a lot of helplessness and hardships. She was originally a golden child in the Prime Minister's manor. When she was just born, she was taken away by criminals and thrown into the wilderness. It wasn't easy for her to meet a kind adoptive mother, but she passed away early. She became an orphan when she was 8 years old. During the chaos of war, she helplessly hid in the mountains to survive alone. She experienced the fickleness of life and the fickleness of the world. How could this kind of girl not make people feel pity for her? If it was them, would they be able to survive alone in the wilderness for 6 years when they were just 8 years old? None of the people present had this kind of confidence. Even if it was 6 days, they probably wouldn't be able to endure it. Not to mention the problem of food and shelter, just the loneliness of surviving alone with no one to take care of them when they were sick. No one to care about them during the winter and summer, and even no one to talk to, wasn't something that ordinary people could endure. After all, people's hearts were made of flesh. Many people present looked at Qin Yining with pity and gentleness in their eyes. You It's been hard on you. Old Madam also couldn't help but sigh in her heart. Her sharpness just now weakened a bit. Qin Yining saw that Old Madam's heart was moved and couldn't help but clench her fist. For pale crescents appeared on her palm from her fingernails, almost oozing blood. However, the pity on her delicate and pretty face was even more obvious. Her almond eyes that were originally swollen from crying overflowed with tears. She walked forward in 2 or 3 steps and supported Qin Yining with both hands. Qin Yining's slender white jade-like hand rubbed Qin Yining's rough and calloused hand. She said tenderly, "Xiaoxi Mimi, you've suffered." The words Xiaoxi were equivalent to agreeing that Old Madam didn't approve of Qin Yining. Everyone was smart, so how could they not understand? Some of the girls lowered their heads to avoid looking, while others whispered to each other. Qin Huining's hand was wet and cold to the touch. For some reason, it reminded Qin Yining of a cold snakeskin. He blinked and withdrew his hand. Ever since she entered the door, the hostility of the person in front of her was the most obvious. It seemed that she was the adopted daughter of unknown origin who had swapped identities with her. She came back to take this person's place. Qin Yining, who had survived in the wild, had an innate ability to sense hostility. Otherwise, she would have been devoured by wild beasts a long time ago. Although she hid deep in the mountains, it wasn't that she didn't leave the mountain at all. She would pick herbs, hunt, and go down the mountain to exchange for some necessities. This meant that she had to come into contact with merchants and hunters. Since she was young, she had followed her adoptive mother to make a living in the marketplace. Her understanding of human nature was probably more thorough than these nobles, because in the war-torn era, in order to survive, she had seen all kinds of dirty and dark things. Qin Huining's fake gentleness was really conflicting, causing Qin Yining to purse his lips. Second Master Qin Han frowned in disapproval. He went forward and saluted. "Old Madam, it's fine if Sister Yi's nickname is Xiao Shi. That's because we don't forget her adoptive mother's kindness of raising her for 8 years. However, our family Qin's daughters are all in the Ning generation. Jianing, Huining, Shuangning, Anning, and Baoning. Which one isn't like this? Moreover, eldest uncle has already given Xiao Shi the maiden name Yining. Old Madam, if you... Now it's the younger generation's turn to control my words? Am I old and can't control this family? Or do you want to be in charge of the family, so you have the final say in the family, Qin?" Although Qin Han was the legitimate eldest son of the third branch, Third Master was born of a concubine. Old Madam didn't like concubines, so she naturally didn't like Qin Han much. Usually, she would take Qin Han's face into consideration, but now that she was angry, she couldn't care less. Second young Mistress Meng went forward and pulled Qin Han's sleeve, reminding her husband not to provoke Old Madam in front of her. However, Qin Han had a chivalrous heart. His stubborn temper was also pushed up by Old Madam's unreasonable words. Although Sister Yi grew up in the countryside, she's eldest uncle's biological daughter. As long as one isn't blind or stupid, one can distinguish her at a glance. Now that no one questions her identity, why does Old Madam still say such things? Old Madam curled her lips and said angrily, "There are many people who look alike in the world. Could it be that all those who look like your eldest uncle are our family's children? Old Madam, in fact, you also know in your heart that Sister Yi is eldest uncle's child who was swapped away by his political enemy. We didn't say what will happen to Sister Hui when Sister Yi comes back. Why are you so nervous? You can even dote on and raise a girl of unknown origin. Why can't you dote on and dote on your biological granddaughter?" The words unknown origin caused Qin Huining's face to turn red. Then, tears rolled down her fair and beautiful face. She sobbed and threw herself into Old Madam's arms, sobbing, "Grandmother, it's granddaughter's fault. It's granddaughter's fault." Old Madam's nose was sore from Qin Huining's crying, and she also shed tears. She patted Qin Huining's back and said, "Sister Hui, don't cry. With grandmother here, they won't dare to do anything to you." She spoke as if everyone wanted to chase away Qin Huining. Everyone knew that Old Madam liked to be like this, so they were helpless. Eldest young Mistress Yao Clan came forward to persuade him, "Younger uncle, you should take Old Madam into consideration. You should speak less." Second young mistress quickly pulled Qin Han's sleeve, indicating that he shouldn't speak anymore. so as to avoid making people dislike him. However, Qin Han didn't mind and continued to speak in a clear voice. If we don't let Sister Yi call Ning, then it's too unfair to her. Sister Hui, you don't have to worry about food and clothing in Prime Minister's residence. What you're enjoying is Sister Yi's fortune. You should speak up for her now. Why are you still harping on her? Qin Huaining, who was called out, raised her eyes to look at Qin Han with a pale face. Qin Han said, currently, the flames of war are swirling everywhere. The country is about to fall. 9 out of 10 houses in Liang City are empty. It's a tragic sight. If you see it with your own eyes and experience it for yourself, you will understand Sister Yi's difficulties. I went out this time because I was so scared that my heart turned cold. I really admire Sister Yi's tenacity. Not to mention other things. If any of you were to live the same life as her, the grass on your grave would be 3 feet tall by now. Our family's flesh and blood has been found. We should happily acknowledge her. Who knows, maybe the country will fall in 2 days. In any case, the family will die together. Qin Huaining's face turned red as he choked with sobs. I was the one who took away Sister Xiaoxi's life. I was the one who didn't treat her well. Qin Han curled his lips and rolled his eyes when he heard this. That's enough, second brother. You talk too much. Eldest Uncle Qin, you waited for Qin Han to finish speaking before speaking in a neutral tone. Dowager Duchess hugged Qin Huaining. She angrily pointed at Qin Han with her finger that wore an emerald ring. You evil creature. I only said 1 sentence, and you said a whole load of words to block my heart. I know that Dowager Duchess will panic when she sees me. I'll just avoid it. You'd better scram far away. Qin Han snorted, pulled his wife, and turned to leave. Dowager Duchess angrily slapped the short table beside her. Her face turned red as she shouted towards the outside, Bastard! Bastard! Get out and don't come to see me. Grandmother, please calm down. Qin Huaining choked with sobs and hurriedly comforted. Second cousin is outspoken and didn't say anything wrong. I'm the one who doesn't deserve it. Dowager Duchess couldn't help but cry bitterly with Qin Huaining after hearing her words. The other girls also cried, and the room was a mess for a moment. Qin Huaining looked on coldly from the sidelines. The brilliance in his eyes dimmed bit by bit. These people who were newly married and surrounded by gold and jade seemed to live in a different world from her. They were clearly in front of her, but she felt that they were too far away. If the outside world was still peaceful and prosperous, she really wanted to leave. She would rather live a simple life. At least she would still have freedom. But she wasn't willing. This was her home. She finally had family. Did she really have to give up everything that originally belonged to her to someone else? She heard from second cousin that her biological mother was still alive. Her mother must have doted on her child, just like her adoptive mother. Even her biological mother did her best to protect her. If her adoptive mother was like this, then her biological mother must have loved her even more. Qin Yining became somewhat anxious. He turned to look at Qin Huayuan, who was frowning, and asked nervously, Father, where is my mother? Why don't I see her? Qin Huaining heard this and suddenly turned to look at Qin Yining. Qin Huayuan faintly said, and then he waved his hand to summon Ji Xiang. Go and invite First Madam. Ji Xiang complied and retreated. Qin Yining no longer looked at Dowager Duchess and the others' reactions. She just stared at the door anxiously. Since she was young, she knew that she was an adopted child. Even in her dreams, she imagined what her mother looked like. Now that she was about to see her mother, even someone who had been tempered by many years of hardships and had a calm temperament couldn't help but be nervous to the point that her palms were sweating. Not long after, the sound of disorderly footsteps could be heard from outside. Then, a young servant girl answered from outside, Dowager Duchess, First Madam, Second Madam, and Third Madam are here. The warm curtains were raised, and a beautiful middle-aged woman wearing a light purple robe with a phoenix head ornament on her head rushed in. She stood beside the ancient shelf and looked around. Her eyes, which were swollen like walnuts from crying, immediately fell on Qin Yining. Qin Yining clenched her fists and instinctively took 2 steps forward. She also looked at this woman. Their eyes met. Although no one told her, she knew that this was her mother. You, Sun clan member slowly walked towards Qin Yining. Her body seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. She raised her trembling hand and touched Qin Yining's face. Qin Yining's almond-shaped eyes finally filled with tears. She murmured, "Mother." She raised her arms and unconsciously took 2 steps forward. Sun Clan member immediately covered her mouth and cried. She stepped back and shook her head. Impossible, impossible. All these years, the child I raised wasn't my own child. How could this be? Chapter 3. The Sun Clan hugged Qin Huaining. Her precious daughter for 14 years was crying her heart out. She also felt as if a knife was being twisted in her heart. Qin Huaining was right. This matter had nothing to do with her. The one who was wrong was the person who swapped her child. The Sun Clan couldn't control herself. She immediately hugged Qin Huaining and cried bitterly. Qin Yining slowly lowered her raised arms. Tears slid down her cheeks and dripped onto the yellow collar of her dress. The corners of her mouth trembled and curved. It turned out that this was her mother's attitude towards her. Qin Huaining saw that the Sun Clan was sobbing uncontrollably. She held back her tears and took a handkerchief to wipe the Sun Clan's tears. She pretended to be strong and said, "Mother, don't be sad. Now that Xiaoxi Mimi can return to your side, this is a good thing. I will never forget your kindness in raising me and old madam's kindness in cherishing me. Even if I leave Prime Minister's Fu in the future, I will still be your daughter. Don't cry. Father and old madam will feel distressed for no reason." The weak young girl's eyes were red and swollen from crying. She didn't forget to comfort her emotional mother. This made old madam feel that she was sensible and sensible. She immediately felt reluctant to part with her. However, the sympathy and pity she had for the wild girl just now was diluted. The Sun Clan also felt the same. Her tears fell even more fiercely. She cried loudly, "What sin have I committed? Why did this matter fall on our family's head?" Second madam and third madam both came to comfort and persuade her. The Sun Clan cried like a child who had been wronged. Qin Huaining promptly coaxed her, "Don't cry. If you miss me in the future, I can come back to see you. Xiaoxi Mimi is your biological daughter. She will definitely take care of you on my behalf. Look at Xiaoxi Mimi. She looks exactly like father. She must be father's flesh and blood. There's no mistake. Now that our family can be reunited, this is a blessing from the heavens. Mother, your good days are still ahead. Don't be sad." Her words were extremely filial, but also extremely provocative. Because no one said that they would send her away, but she deliberately mentioned it several times. It was clear that she was worried and guilty. The third Miss Qin Jianing and the sixth Miss Qin Shuangning looked at each other and didn't say anything. Seventh Miss Qin uncurled her lips and sneered. The members of the Sun Clan lowered their eyes and pondered over Qin Huaining's words. Suddenly, they seemed to have thought of something. Qin Yining's hands, which were hanging by his side, slowly clenched into fists. He looked at the mother and daughter with an indecipherable expression. Finally, his gaze landed on Qin Huaining, who was putting on a good show. The members of the Sun Clan seemed to sense something. They looked up and met Qin Yining's gaze. Sister Hui was right. This girl was indeed very similar to her father. Her beautiful eyes and delicate face reminded her of the young Qin Huaiyuan. But upon closer inspection, he realized that Qin Yining did not resemble him at all. When she was young, she was beautiful and dignified, but this girl was bright and charming. Every woman who saw her would find her attractive. How was this like her? How could she be sure that she was her biological daughter? Looking at Qin Huaining again, her sister Hui had some of the elegant character she had when she was young. It was said that Qin Huaiyuan's trusted aide met this girl in Liang City. When he saw that she was shockingly similar to Qin Huaiyuan when he was young, he couldn't help but become suspicious. Later, he went to investigate and brought her back after several twists and turns. But this was only Qin Huaiyuan's side of the story. The members of the Sun Clan frowned and looked at their silent husband. Could it be that Qin Huaiyuan had a mistress who gave birth to this girl? After all, this girl was about the same age as Sister Hui. Qin Huaiyuan had always been a person who cherished his reputation. Could it be that he had taken advantage of her pregnancy to have a bastard child? Now that he wanted to bring her back, he made up such a story to win sympathy. That's right. Even though Qin Yining looked thin and malnourished, Her aura was very calm. Although she was shy when meeting strangers, she didn't have a timid aura. How could a savage who grew up in the mountains have this kind of aura? Maybe Qin Huayuan said that on purpose to trick people into sympathizing with him. Qin Huayuan was in a high position, but he had few children. He only had one daughter. There were countless women who wanted to give birth to Qin Huayuan's children. The Sun clan didn't feel safe being the wife of the prime minister. Moreover, from the bottom of her heart, she was unwilling to accept the fact that the daughter she had raised for more than 10 years wasn't her biological daughter. Now that she thought of this, she suddenly felt that she had grasped the crux of the problem. When she looked at Qin Yining again, there was a trace of suspicion in her eyes. Qin Huaining had been nervously observing her mother. The Sun clan's obvious suspicion of Qin Yining calmed her down a little. However, Qin Yining's heart gradually turned cold. When she was young, before the flames of war reached Liang City, her adoptive mother once took her to a fortune teller. The fortune teller said that she had the fate of sisters have no one to rely on, 6 relatives of ice and charcoal. Now, it seemed that the saying 6 relatives of ice and charcoal was indeed true. Her biological mother's suspicious gaze was even more unbearable than when she was stared at by wild wolves in the mountains. A chill crept up from the soles of her feet, causing her entire body to turn cold. She was greedy and shouldn't have asked for too much. Qin Yining closed her eyes. When she opened them again, there was an unyielding light in her eyes. Her unyielding spirit was polished by many years of survival experience. The more adversity she faced, the more tenacious and unyielding she had to be. This was because she had encountered many dangers while growing up. If she had slacked off even once, she probably wouldn't have lived to this day. Her tenacity had been honed by survival, so she would never lower her head in the face of difficulties. Although this home was cold and indifferent, it was still easier than living deep in the mountains. Moreover, it wasn't like she couldn't slowly change these people's opinions. There was no reason for them to like her at first sight, right? Qin Yining slowly relaxed her tightly clenched fists and regained her composure. Qin Yining had been secretly observing Qin Yining, but he was dazzled by the light in her eyes. He originally thought that she was a country bumpkin and would retreat after a scare. Now, it seemed that he had underestimated her. The Sun clan member walked towards Qin Yining and asked, "Do you live in Liang City?" Was he going to interrogate her again? "Yes, I lived in Liang City for as long as I could remember. My adoptive mother, Madame Liu, was a widow. When I could remember, she told me my background and raised me until she passed away due to illness when I was 8 years old." "From the way you speak, you seem to be literate?" The Sun clan member was suspicious. "My adoptive mother was once a maidservant of a wealthy family. Her late husband was a scholar. She was also somewhat literate. When I was young, she enlightened me and taught me a few things. However, later on, life became difficult and we were robbed by bandits several times. Most of the books in our home were lost. My adoptive mother was busy with the household and rarely taught me. There was no loophole in this story." The Sun clan member twirled her handkerchief around Qin Yining and looked her up and down. At this moment, everyone in the room could see that the Sun clan was suspicious of Qin Yining. Some didn't understand, and some didn't look at her with disdain. All kinds of gazes fell on Qin Yining and the Sun clan. If she was an ordinary girl who hadn't seen the world, she would have been frightened by this scene. However, Qin Yining was very calm and allowed everyone to size her up. After a while, the Sun clan member said, "When is your birthday?" "I only know that I was born in the 16th of the 6th month. My adoptive mother picked me up early in the morning on the 6th day of the 6th month. She said that I was by a small stream behind Sikui Mountain in the southern part of the capital." "So you're saying that you lived in the capital for a while when you were young?" "Perhaps, but as far as I can remember, I was in Liang City." "Mother, you. Don't call me mother." The Sun clan member suddenly raised her voice and gave everyone a fright. Perhaps the Sun clan member realized that her attitude was too much, so she stiffly said, "In a large family like ours, we don't call people mother. Those who have a title need to be called madam. Those who don't have a title need to be called madam. Only those from small families need to be called father and mother." Qin Yining blinked her long eyelashes. In the end, she didn't mention that Qin Huaining had called her mother. She obediently called her madam. The dowager madam coughed. Since you've confirmed that she's Meng Guer's daughter, then she can stay. But let me say something first. My sister Hui will never leave my side. Qin Huayuan's courtesy name was Meng, and his middle name was Meng Guer. The dowager madam thought for a moment and said, after all, this girl grew up in the countryside. I'm afraid that she won't know the rules if she rashly returns to the Prime Minister's fu. In 2 days, Sister Jia will be of marriageable age. At that time, there will be many guests and friends. It won't be good if she loses face. It's better to send her to the fields first and hire a mama who knows the rules to properly educate her. Then, we can pick a day to bring her back. When everyone heard this, they looked at the dowager madam in astonishment. They didn't expect that she would be so biased towards Qin Huaining. If they really sent her to the fields, it would be hard to say what day they would bring her back. If the dowager madam wasn't happy, she could casually invite a fortune teller to perform divination and find an excuse to delay. When the Sun Clan heard this, they were somewhat hesitant. Although she didn't care about this wild girl and suspected that she was raised by an outsider, she was still Qin Huayuan's blood. It was also possible that she had given birth to her. After muttering to herself for a moment, the Sun Clan said, Lei Oi has few children. For so many years, he only has one daughter. Even if both girls stay, our eldest branch only has 2 daughters. Dowager madam, this daughter-in-law has a presumptuous request. Although Sister E has been found, Sister Hui has fate with our family. In the future, she will still be my eldest legitimate daughter. Sister E will be counted as my youngest daughter. She will enter the register and be counted as the second legitimate daughter. Is that okay? The Sun Clan's plan was exactly what the dowager madam wanted. It's best that you think this way, the Sun Clan said. As for the rules that the dowager madam mentioned, we can invite an old mama from the palace to teach them. It's also good for her to go to the farmstead. This way, this will give this daughter-in-law, Sister Hui, and all the other sisters in the family some buffer time. The Sun Clan obeyed the dowager madam and planned to send their daughter away. Qin Huaining heaved a sigh of relief quietly. Her hanging heart was finally relieved. Qin Yining bit her lip and looked at Qin Huayuan for help. She didn't do anything wrong, so why did she have to be sent away? Could it be that she wasn't the daughter of a Qin family? Her eyes were helpless and soft, which made Qin Huayuan's heart skip a beat. Sister E can stay in the fu. The tutor and the old mama who teaches the rules can be invited to the fu to teach her. Qin Huayuan finally spoke. A legitimate daughter is a legitimate daughter, and an adopted daughter is an adopted daughter. Could it be that because she wasn't raised by your side, Sister E isn't a legitimate daughter? Qin Huaining's nerves, which had just relaxed, tensed up again. Chapter 4. Qin Huayuan saw that the old madam was anxious, so he cupped his hands and said in a soothing voice, Mother, don't worry. I didn't mean to send Sister Hui away. It's just that the bloodline of the family Qin can't be mixed up, and there's no room for mistakes in the genealogy. What I mean is that Qin Yining should be added to the genealogy and replace Qin Huaining. I also want to report to the ancestors that Sister Hui was taken in by mistake and adopted as my adopted daughter. She won't be ranked in the family in the future. Yining will be the legitimate daughter of the eldest branch, the 4th miss of the family Qin. Everyone looked at Qin Yining and Qin Huaining with different expressions. The old madam was silent. There was indeed no room for mistakes in the genealogy, but she couldn't bear to part with Qin Huaining. Qin Huaining felt as if she was struck by lightning. From now on, she would only be an adopted daughter of unknown origin, and would no longer be the legitimate daughter of Prime Minister Qin. She was going to be of marriageable age in the coming year. All these years, Prime Minister Qin had kept her to carefully look for a suitable match. Now, she hadn't been engaged, and her status would plummet in the future. What would happen to her marriage? Why did such misfortune befall her at this critical juncture? Why did Qin Yining have to come back? Qin Huaining couldn't accept it and started sobbing. This time, she really couldn't restrain herself from crying. After all, she was a child raised by them. The Sun Clan couldn't bear to see Qin Huaining being wronged like this. She pulled her hand and said anxiously to Qin Huayuan, Master, you can't. Even if Sister Hui becomes an adopted daughter, she'll still eat and wear the same things as your biological daughter. Qin Huayuan looked at the Sun Clan with unquestionable determination in his eyes. Then, he narrowed his eyes and said, "Do you want me to send Sister Hui back to the health hall, or find her biological parents and send them back before Madam is satisfied?" This was an undisguised threat. He actually embarrassed her in front of everyone for a wild girl that he had just found. The Sun Clan's face turned red with anger, and she blurted out in anger, "A wild girl who didn't grow up under your watch is worthy of you acting like this? Qin Ming, could it be that this girl was raised by your mistress? Why did you only bring her back? Fortunately, you also brought her mother, that vixen. Anyway, you've long been disgusted with us women. From now on, you can live with your mistress." The Sun Clan's daughter, Duke, was the legitimate daughter of Duke Dinghua, was of noble birth, hurt, so she was naturally a bit arrogant. Because of this, she was, because of her fierce and domineering aunt's wife, TSS eldest, because she, and because she was because she, her fierce and unruised, right teat, If it was someone else, they definitely wouldn't dare to argue with their husband like this in front of everyone. However, the Sun Clan's maternal family had a strong backing, so they naturally had nothing to fear. When Qin Huaining saw that his mother was still willing to stand up for him despite knowing that he wasn't her biological daughter, he was moved and hugged her. He repeatedly called out like a kitten, "Mother, don't be angry. Don't get angry with father because of me." However, the Sun Clan didn't listen and only glared at Qin Huayuan. Qin Huayuan couldn't stand it anymore and reprimanded, "Impudent. You're the impudent one." Her nails, painted with bright red nail polish, poked Qin Yining's forehead. "Speak. Where is your mother? Is it that your father is raising your mother in some house?" Qin Yining looked at the Sun Clan in disbelief. He took 2 steps back from her poke, and his heart was filled with sorrow. When she saw Qin Huaining holding the Sun Clan's arm neither loosely nor tightly, but allowing the Sun Clan to pounce on him, she immediately understood something. It seemed that in order to survive in this large residence, acting was even more important. Crying, Qin Yining lifted her skirt and knelt down. He said mournfully, "Madam, please calm down. I know that it's hard for Madam to accept right now, but I really came from Liang City. When I was 8 years old, I had no one to rely on. Do you know how I managed to survive until today?" He reached out his hands, which were covered with calluses and scars, and grasped the Sun Clan's well-maintained hand. "Look at the calluses and scars on my hands. You can tell that I'm not a pampered person." With father's sense of responsibility, even if he knew that Huaining wasn't his biological daughter, he would still tolerate it. If I really was an illegitimate daughter, why would father make my life so difficult? Moreover, father is the current prime minister and the emperor's right-hand man. He's second only to the emperor and above everyone else. If he really liked a woman, why would he raise an illegitimate daughter? Who would be able to stop him if he directly brought her home? He really didn't need to tell such a lie. Since Madam can't accept me for the time being, I can wait for you to accept me. I'm also willing to get along well with Huaining. Please don't be impulsive. My words in a moment of anger will hurt your relationship with father." Qin Yining was born beautiful, and he was also very thin and weak. After his tearful complaints, the eyes of all the womenfolk in the room were wet. The Sun Clan stood in place and looked down at her tear-stained little face. He held her rough hand in his and believed some of her words. Moreover, what she said really wasn't detestable, especially the last sentence. The Sun Clan glanced at Qin Huayuan from the corner of his eyes. He thought to himself, "If Qin Huayuan can give me a way out, then I'll drop this matter for the time being." However, after hearing Qin Yining's words, Qin Huayuan felt pity for him. He thought back to the miserable state of Liang City, where the starving people were everywhere. Then he thought about Qin Yining's experiences in the past 6 years. His heart was filled with pain and anger. During this period of time, he was already badly battered. The 2 countries had been at war for several years. Dian was on the verge of defeat. The current Grand Marshal of Dezhou's military was Pang Xiao, the posthumous son of the Protector General of Northern Ji, Feng Zhongzheng, whom he had plotted to get rid of. Pang Xiao, whose courtesy name was Shi, was 22 years old. After Feng Zhongzheng was rehabilitated, he was given the posthumous title of Prince Zhongshuan. He inherited the throne, and the Jianghu called him Little Wang Yi. He was the only king with a different surname in the 2 years since Dezhou was founded. He was very popular among the people. It was said that when he was 14, he followed Dezhou's emperor, Li Qitian, and started an uprising against Northern Ji's tyranny. Now, his prestige in the military was quite deep. He didn't even need a commander's seal to mobilize troops. Pang Xiao just needed to poke the commander's seal in front of the army. Although he was young, he had already been on the battlefield for 8 years. He was known for his treacherous military tactics and his ruthlessness. In the past, Feng Zhongzheng was sentenced to death by the emperor of Northern Ji. He was cut into pieces and fed to the dogs. Pang Xiao took revenge for his father in the same way. Of the ministers of the previous dynasty who framed his father, there were 3 who were personally skinned and dismembered by his own hands. There were countless others who didn't do it himself. It was said that the bloodstains outside the Meridian Gate were washed with water for 3 days and 3 nights, but the smell of blood still didn't disperse. And he, Qin Huaiyuan, was the chief culprit who tried to drive a wedge between them. After Dezhou was founded, the pace of conquering the world went straight to Dian. Dian and Northern Ji had been fighting for many years. They were already weak. Now, how could they fight against Dezhou, who was like a hot knife through butter? If one day the city was conquered, how could Pang Xiao not take revenge for his father? These days, whenever Qin Huaiyuan thought of that evil fetus, he couldn't sleep peacefully. The years of war had already emptied the national treasury. Unfortunately, the 2 factions who supported the war were still arguing in full swing. There were simply not many people working on proper matters. Qin Huaiyuan was already too busy to deal with the matters of the imperial court. When he returned home, this group of ignorant women didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. They actually bothered him over such a small matter. Qin Huaiyuan didn't feel like saying these things to these women. He also didn't feel like paying attention to the unreasonable Sun Clan. He only said, "This matter is settled." Then he flicked his sleeves and left, leaving the Sun Clan alone in the cold. Everyone could see that Qin Huaiyuan was really angry. After all, he was the head of the family. If he was really angry, no one could go against his will. The Sun Clan was also a bit scared. After all, she was the one who made a racket first. However, she felt that she would lose face if she took the initiative to show weakness. For a moment, she was in a dilemma. She sniffed her nose, feeling wronged. The old madam was dissatisfied that the Sun Clan doubted her son's character. Then she looked at Qin Yining, who was standing to the side. She felt that this matter was caused by her, so she disliked her even more. She said in a deep voice, "Tidy up Snow Pear Courtyard for 4th young miss to live in. Sister Hui will move in and live with me." She recognized Qin Yining's identity, but let her live in the remote Snow Pear Courtyard. Qin Huaining, who had lost her status as the legitimate daughter, wanted to move to Ci Shao Garden. The old madam's suppression and praise were always so straightforward. Seeing that the old madam had already made her decision, everyone could only agree. The Sun Clan had tears in her eyes. She felt that she had suffered a great grievance and didn't want to stay any longer. After whispering a few words to Qin Huaining, she bid farewell and left without looking back. She wasn't even willing to give Qin Yining any more attention. However, the Sun Clan's capable maid, Mother Jean, bowed to the old madam. Then she went to Qin Yining's side and bowed. She said, "This servant pays respects to 4th young Mississippi." Qin Yining didn't recognize this person. It was also the first time that someone had called herself a servant in front of her. She couldn't react for a moment. Next to her, an 11 or 12-year-old girl dressed in a light pink flowery jacket with her hair combed into 2 buns said in a low voice, "This is the eldest madam's wet nurse, Mother Jean. She is the eldest madam's most capable mother." Qin Yining smiled gratefully and then nodded to Mother Jean. "Mother Jean, greetings." Mother Jean smiled and said, "Actually, the eldest madam's heart is full of concern for you. Early in the morning, she chose her most capable maidservants to serve you. In a moment, this servant will bring them to pay respects to 4th young Mississippi." Qin Yining nodded. "Thank you for your trouble, Mother Jean." Mother Jean smiled and retreated to the corridor. The old madam had already instructed Mammy Qin to bring people to move all of Qin Huaining's things to Ci Shao Garden. Seeing that this group of people was still standing there, she sent them away. Qin Yining copied the behavior of the surrounding girls and bowed to the old madam. Just as she was about to leave, she heard the old madam call out, "Qin Yining." All of the sisters stopped in their tracks. Because the old madam didn't call them, they could only suppress their curiosity and leave. Qin Yining turned around and bowed to the old madam, "Grandmother." As soon as she spoke, she saw the old madam roll her eyes impatiently. "Didn't your mother say just now that in a large family like ours, we don't call each other relatives? We have to call each other Fengao." Qin Yining lowered her eyes and called out again, "Old madam." And the old madam dragged out her voice and responded, "Although I've allowed you to stay in the Fu, I'm still worried. In the future, you have to be careful with your words and actions. Later on, I'll ask a teacher to teach you. You have to learn well, and don't bring your vulgar temperament into the Fu. The girls in the Fu are all pure and clean. Don't tire them out." Qin Yining's hands that were hanging by her sides clenched into fists. She gritted her teeth and obediently said after a long time, "Old madam is right. I will be careful." Chapter 5. Qin Yining lowered her head. She didn't want to argue with old madam, so she simply replied, "Yes." Old madam saw that Qin Yining was so obedient, and her mood became much better. She turned and said, "Even so, don't forget to learn what you need to learn as soon as possible. In 2 days, Sister Jia will be of marriageable age. Next year, you and Sister Hui will also be of marriageable age. During this period, I will pay attention to the matter of finding a suitable husband for you. If you are incompetent and are disliked by others, your marriage may not be good. I can't be bothered to care about you." Qin Yining pursed her lips. When she raised her head, there was a well-behaved smile on her face. "Old madam's advice is right. I will definitely learn seriously and not disappoint your expectations." Her face was originally like a sculpture. Although she had a soul-stirring appearance, her eyes were as pure as a clear spring. When she smiled, the small dimples on her cheeks made her look very cute. Old madam almost softened by her lovable smile and obedient attitude. She waved her hand with a straight face and said, "You can go." "Yes, granddaughter will take her leave." Qin Yining bowed and retreated. Old madam unnaturally added, "If you have any problems, go and find Mammy Qin." Qin Yining immediately revealed an appropriate smile of being overwhelmed by favor. "Yes, many thanks, old madam." Seeing Qin Yining obediently leave, old madam said, "Lu Juan, what do you think of this child?" Lu Juan was Mammy Qin's small name. Mammy Qin smiled and came forward to hand old madam a brass hand warmer with a moderate temperature. She smiled and said, "Old madam has a good eye. So you want to carve this piece of unpolished jade, right? No matter what, she is still the eldest master's biological daughter. Her aptitude can't be wrong. Moreover, this old servant feels that she must be a tenacious and intelligent person to be able to survive to this day after experiencing so many hardships. If she wasn't tenacious, she wouldn't have been able to survive for 6 years at such a young age. If she wasn't intelligent, she wouldn't have been able to survive to this day in the city where danger lurked everywhere." Madame Dowager sighed. "My feelings towards her are also complicated. Perhaps it's because we are related by blood. Have you settled Sister Hui's matters? Be careful, don't make my Sister Hui feel wronged." Mammy Qin saw that old madam didn't take her words to heart, so it wasn't good for her to say more. She just smiled and agreed. When Qin Yining left the main room and walked into the courtyard, he felt a venomous gaze fall on his back. He turned around abruptly, but all he saw was the half-closed window of the room. He didn't see anyone. Anyway, she was not afraid of being bitten by mosquitoes. There were many people in this house who hated her, so she did not care who they were. Therefore, he didn't mind and quickly walked through the hall and left Ci Shao Garden. Only after Qin Yining had walked far away did Qin Huining throw down the handkerchief that had been twisted like a fried dough twist. The head maidservant, Bai Tong, immediately delivered a cup of warm honey water. "Miss, don't be angry. She's just a wild girl with an unstable foundation." Qin Huining drank the honey water in one gulp. The sweet taste made her feel much better. She calmed down and said, Mammy, Madame Kai immediately smiled and said, "Miss, what are your orders?" "I remember that you said a few words to Mother Jean, who was by Mother's side." Madame Kai was Mother Jin's niece. "Of course. What orders does Miss have? Come here." Qin Huaining called Madame Kai over and whispered a few words in her ear. Qin Yining walked out of Ci Shao Garden. Before she could see the surroundings clearly, the girl who had reminded her just now took the initiative to come forward and salute. She smiled and said, "Fourth sister, I'm Bowning, the eighth in the family. My father is third master." "Oh, the one who was scolded away by Madame Dowager is my brother." Qin Yining had a good impression of Qin Bowning because Qin Bowning had helped her just now, and Qin Han had taken care of her all the way and defended her just now. Qin Yining copied Qin Bowning's salute and returned the salute. "Sister Bowning, nice to meet you." Qin Bowning smiled brightly. "Fourth sister, you just came back. You don't know everything in the house yet. If you have any problems, you can come to me. I live in Tsuewei building with third sister." She pulled Qin Jining aside and introduced her. "This is third sister." Qin Jining pulled her hand out of Qin Bowning's hand and said, "You're so talkative. Aren't you afraid that your fourth sister will be annoyed?" Qin Bowning stuck out her tongue but didn't say anything else. Qin Jining smiled and said, "This girl insisted on making me wait for you here. I told her that we'll go and disturb you after you've settled down. Wouldn't that be better?" But she refused to listen and said a few words in such a hurry. "Isn't she saying goodbye to you temporarily? Mother Jean is still waiting for you. Let's meet again after fourth sister has settled down." "Third sister is right. After I've settled down, I'll definitely go and disturb you." Qin Yining spoke slowly because she needed to think. Her mellow voice had a special charm to it. "Fourth sister, you don't have to be so polite. Maybe I won't be able to resist coming to disturb you first." Qin Bowning smiled and pulled her hand. Qin Yining couldn't help but smile when she heard this. Qin Jining and Qin Bowning said goodbye to Qin Yining together. Mother Jean saw that the two of them had left. She smiled and walked up to them. "Miss, let's go?" Qin Yining hurriedly smiled and said, "I've made Mother wait for a long time. Serving Miss is this servant's duty. Miss, you don't have to be so polite." Mother Jean led Qin Yining in the direction of Snow Pear Courtyard. The Prime Minister's residence was a large courtyard with 4 entrances. Old Madame Ci Shao Garden was located in the southwest. It occupied the largest courtyard in the inner residence. After exiting Ci Shao Garden, they turned left and walked along an alley paved with limestone bricks. On their right was Chuehua Gate. Mother Jean pointed at the gate and said, "Usually, Miss is not allowed to leave this gate. If there's anything you need to do, you can assign a servant to do it. The gate is locked at the hour of the evening and opens at 1:15 of the morning. If you need to buy something or find someone, Miss should be very careful." "Thank you, Mother Jean, for your guidance." Mother Jean smiled and led Qin Yining along the long limestone path. Along the way, she pointed out the third branch's Guangbo Yuan and the second branch's Chongning Yuan. On the way, they passed by the back garden. In the garden, there was a large pond with a white stone arch bridge over it. The remaining lotuses in the pond were rustling. One couldn't help but think of a summer day. The clear waves of the weeping willows and the endless green color would be beautiful. Upon closer inspection, there was flowing water. It was actually water from outside the residence. From afar, Qin Yining looked at the vermilion railings and white stones. The eaves were high. Up close, she looked at the flowers and trees, and the ground was covered in light. This garden was exquisite and luxurious. The fondness on Qin Yining's face made Mother Jean look askance. After passing by the back garden, Mother Jean casually pointed, "That's Cui Wei Lu, turn around, and you'll see Chongning Yuan, where eldest master and eldest madam live." She led Qin Yining in the opposite direction. The further they walked, the more remote it became. They walked along an alley until they reached the end. In front of them was the courtyard wall of the Prime Minister's residence. Only then did she push open a vermilion lacquered courtyard door and said, "This is Snow Pear Courtyard." Behind the vermilion lacquered door was a small courtyard. The gravel path wound to the corridor. In the courtyard, there were a few bamboos, a few pear trees, and a thick and tall old locust tree. There were 3 main rooms, 2 east and west wing rooms, and 3 back rooms. The courtyard was small and exquisite. It looked somewhat desolate. This courtyard is fresh and elegant. It's most suitable for Mississippi. Because old Madam's arrangements were sudden, we didn't have time to order someone to clean it up. This servant will order someone to come and bring the servant girl that eldest Madam arranged for you. You can rest here for a while. Mother Jean spoke extremely politely. Qin Yining only nodded her head in thanks. However, she understood that if eldest Madam truly valued her, she wouldn't have let an unmarried girl live in a courtyard that was so close to the courtyard wall. She also wouldn't have brought her in without cleaning it up and even locked the door. This was just to show her who was in charge. Even so, to be able to live in this kind of courtyard was much better than the cave and grass hut she had lived in the mountains. Qin Yining found a stone stool next to the bamboo and sat down to wait. Who would have thought that this wait would go on for 2 hours, and the sky was about to turn dark? Qin Yining wanted to call for someone. However, she didn't know who to look for in such a large courtyard. Fortunately, she had trained her patience from hunting for many years. Fortunately, she just quietly sat on the stone stool. A cold wind blew, and scattered bamboo leaves fluttered down. The young girl's light yellow dress and the color of the green bamboo behind her back softened into a picture scroll under the bright and beautiful noon sun. The young girl lowered her head, and her long black hair fell to the side of her neck. It made her neck look even more white and slender, and the side of her face was beautiful. This scene was completely captured in the eyes of the 2 people who were quietly sitting on the roof. The person in the lead was dressed in green. His face was delicate and flawless, and his 2 long eyebrows were slanted to his temples. His pair of phoenix eyes were cold and deep, like the stars in the cold night. His thin lips were lightly pursed, and his face was expressionless. His temperament was graceful and noble, like an unsheathed sharp blade. It made people who looked at him want to lower their heads, not daring to meet his eyes. He quietly watched Qin Yining in the courtyard for a moment, then quietly left the family Qin with his accompanying bodyguard. His bodyguard was a 17 or 18-year-old youth. He was dressed in a dark blue outfit, and his long hair was tied up in a ponytail behind his head. He looked extremely energetic. After leaving the family Qin, the youth hurriedly asked curiously, "Master, is that girl the person you were looking for?" "Yes. She actually survived. She is really lucky. Mr. Zhang said that the last time you saw her, she was only 7 years old." "Yes. The family Qin is really a good-for-nothing. They told her to wait outside on such a cold day and didn't even give her warm clothes. It must have been hard on her patience." "Yes. But who told her to be Qin Ming's daughter? Serves her right. Mr. Zhang said that you gave her money and told her to treat her foster mother's illness?" "Master, it's not that I want to say this, but you are too kind. Why do you care if the child of your enemy is dead or alive? If she dies, she will pay for her despicable father's life. Why do you care so much about her?" The man's footsteps paused, and he looked at the youth expressionlessly. The youth's hair stood on end, and he didn't dare to say anything else. His Wang Yi was good at everything, but he was too cold. He had followed his master for several years, but he had never seen his master smile sincerely. Even last year, when the emperor rehabilitated General Yu and conferred him the title of Prince Zhongshuan, and his master succeeded to the throne, he didn't see him happy. Perhaps in the future, when he got his revenge, he would truly be able to relax. Chapter 6. Qin Yining did not know that someone had come by earlier. She waited until the afternoon, when Mother Jean finally brought her in when she was cold to the bone. "I've made you wait for a long time. Mistress just gave me some errands, and I was delayed for a few hours." Mother Jean only gave a brief explanation and did not give Qin Yining time to speak before introducing the 4 maidservants behind her to her. "This is Yu Xiang and Ruelan. They are both second-ranked maidservants under Mistress Wang. Their temperaments are the most gentle and obedient, so they were specially assigned to serve you. This is Lu Ya and Xiao Lu. They are third-ranked maidservants." Qin Yining sized up the 4 maidservants in turn. The 4 of them looked to be around 16 or 17 years old. Yu Xiang was tall and thin with outstanding looks, but her eyes were too lively. Ruelan was slightly plump and had a sincere smile. Lu Ya's lips were thin and looked like she could talk. Qiu Lu had her head lowered and did not seem to exist. She was probably someone who was used to silence. Yu Xiang, Ruelon, Lu Ya, and Qiu Lu all came forward to greet Qin Yining. Qin Yining nodded slightly and had them stand to the side. Mother Jean continued, "There's also a housekeeper and a young maidservant in charge of cleaning." As soon as she finished speaking, an old woman brought in 3 young maidservants around the age of 10. They were dressed in red and green. Mother Jean introduced, "This is Zhu Mama. In the future, she will be in charge of all matters in Snow Pear Courtyard. These are the young maidservants who will listen to Mrs. orders in the future." This servant greets forth young Mississippi. Zhu Mama was a chubby woman with a simple and honest face. She had silver hair at the side of her temples and looked to be around 50 years old. "Zhu Mama, please rise," Qin Yining said slowly. Mother Jean said, "I've already brought them here. Miss, you can order them around. If you have any instructions, you can find this servant at any time." "Thank you for your trouble, Mother Jean." Mother Jean bowed and retreated. Qin Yining frowned slightly. She had just arrived and didn't have any money to reward. In fact, as long as Mother Jean was a little more kind to her, with her position in the household, she could casually order these people to do things more effectively than her own words. However, Mother Jean only casually brushed her off and refused to say anything more to these people. Mother Jean was Old Madam's subordinate. Her wishes were Old Madam's wishes. It seemed that her biological mother really didn't like her. Qin Yining took a deep breath and looked at the 8 people standing in front of him. She had suffered since she was young, so how could she order people around? At this moment, he really didn't know where to start. Seeing that she didn't speak, the 8 people couldn't help but look at each other. A moment later, Qin Yining looked at the locked main room and the side rooms. He slowly said, "I'm sure you all know my situation. It's really hard on you to arrange for you to come here. Although I have a hard life and am not fated to grow up by my parents' side, I am still my father's biological daughter. As long as you do your duty well, we will live on together." These words contained many meanings. These were the most appropriate words that Qin Yining could think of. She only wanted to live a peaceful life.
Yes.
Everyone bowed and couldn't help but look at Qin Yining a few more times. It was said that this young lady's appearance was very similar to Prime Minister Qin's. Looking at her now, wasn't it exactly the case? Although she had grown up in the countryside and had even worked as a barbarian in the mountains, her real appearance wasn't real. However, the power and influence she exuded could not be faked, and people who saw it did not dare to overstep their boundaries for no reason. Everyone restrained themselves from looking down on her, and those who felt that they were unlucky and had a hard life suppressed their thoughts for the time being. Qin Yining ordered everyone to tidy up the room. There were 3 main rooms. As Qin Yining's living quarters, one room in the east was arranged for Mama Zhu to live alone. One room was arranged for 2 second-ranked maids to live together, and one room was arranged for 2 third-ranked maids to live together. The maids all lived in the back, next to the small kitchen. As soon as this room was cleaned, Mother Jean brought people to the other room. She brought over bedding, curtains, utensils, furnishings, the 4 treasures of the study, clothes, shoes, socks, and rouge. She also handed over 2 taels of silver to Qin Yining. "Young lady, this is this month's allowance." According to the rules of the manor, the young ladies all received 2 taels of silver. In addition, you have to go to the main kitchen to bring food boxes over for 3 meals. You also have to make breakfast in the morning and evening. As Mother Jean spoke, she felt a bit impatient. She changed the topic and said, "In the future, young lady will understand when you live here longer." "I'll have to trouble Mother Jean. In a moment, I'll go pay respects to First Madam." Qin Yining smiled. Mother Jean smiled. She didn't say anything else and left in a hurry. After tidying up for a full 2 hours, the room finally looked brand new. The furniture and furnishings in the room had been there for a long time. However, they had changed out the light green bedding and chairs. The bed had a light green canopy, and an exquisite incense ball had been hung on it. The bedding was also very thick. Mama Zhu was currently holding a hot water bottle and stuffing it into the quilt to warm it up. Yu Xiang and Ruelon were tidying up her dressing table and wardrobe. They put away a few bottles and jars, and also arranged a few fancy head ornaments. The maids were carrying wooden basins out and hurriedly cleaning the side rooms and seats. In the future, this would be her home. Although it was a bit damp and desolate because no one had lived here for a long time, it was much better than the cave she lived in. Although she didn't know if the people around her all had good intentions towards her, having someone to talk to was much better than talking to the squirrels and rabbits on the mountain. As long as she was willing to endure and work hard, her days would get better and better. Qin Yining sat on a round chair covered with soft bedding in the main hall. A smile bloomed on her bright face. Mississippi Xiao Lu carried a tea tray over and placed an exquisite white porcelain cup of wintersweet on the black square table beside her. Ever since she returned to the Fu, she hadn't touched a drop of water. Furthermore, she had been outside in the cold for 2 hours. Now that she had a cup of steaming tea in her hand, the warmth of it warmed her heart. She couldn't help but smile and say, "Thank you." Xiao Lu hurriedly said, "This servant doesn't dare." Hearing the commotion, Yu Xiang, who was tidying up the dressing table, curled her lips. Ruelan glanced at Xiao Lu and took out a honey-colored brocade cloak from the mahogany cabinet. She smiled and said, "Miss, put this on first. Don't catch a cold. This servant will instruct the servants to bring the food boxes." Xiao Lu took the tea tray and left. Luya brought in a hot water bottle, wrapped it in a handkerchief, and placed it on Qin Yining's lap. Qin Yining smiled at her but didn't thank her. She had seen Ruelan's gaze just now. She had to adapt to her current identity as soon as possible. Right at this moment, Qin Yining saw Yu Xiang put a booklet into her bosom from the corner of his eye. "What's that? Let me take a look." Qin Yining put down the cup. Yu Xiang rolled her eyes with her back facing Qin Yining. She turned around and handed over the booklet with a smile on her face. "This is the booklet for registering all the items in Snow Pear Courtyard." Qin Yining flipped through the booklet carefully. Yu Xiang curled her lips and exchanged glances with Ruelan. She didn't believe that she could recognize these words. There weren't many things in the room, but there weren't few either. Qin Yining flipped to the jewelry section and pointed at a line of words. "I don't see this gold pearl headband." Yu Xiang's face froze. Hadn't she been sitting there all this time? There were so many people moving around in the room and so many things were placed there. How could she remember everything? Ruelan hurried to the jewelry section and looked left and right. She then went to the Arhat bed and rummaged for a while with her back facing Qin Yining. She then took out the headband and smiled. "I found it. I accidentally left it under the mattress." Qin Yining smiled faintly and pointed at the clothing section. "I don't see the blood jade gourd on the dress." He then closed the booklet and handed it to Yu Xiang. He smiled and said, "Look at it carefully. I hope I don't step on an earring when I wear shoes." Yu Xiang blushed at his joke. Ruelan also looked a little embarrassed. Qin Yining didn't say anything else and continued hugging the hot water bottle to keep warm. There were more small things in the jewelry section and the wardrobe that she hadn't seen before. Qin Yining lowered her eyes and felt that it was funny. She knew that she was new here and couldn't convince everyone, but she didn't expect the servant girls in the room to embezzle her things. They probably didn't know that she had a photographic memory since she was young. Moreover, she had dealt with hunters and medicine merchants for many years. She was honed to be able to calculate the weight of things that weighed more than 100 caddies with just a flip of her hand. She lowered her eyes and covered her scarred and white hands with calluses on the hot water bottle to keep warm. It seemed that she still had many difficulties in the future. First, she had to deal with the people around her. After Qin Yining finished her dinner, she took a cup of tea from Baitong and asked Kaishir with a smile, "Has everyone been arranged?" "Young miss, everything has been arranged. I replaced 3 of the original people and arranged for Yu Xiang, Ruelan, and Luya to go over. All 3 of them had good tempers. The steward also arranged for Zhu Mama." "Zhu Mama?" Qin Yining was puzzled. Kaishir explained, "It's that Zhu Mama whose son is in charge of the stable in the outer courtyard and whose daughter-in-law is in the kitchen." Qin Huaining smiled when she heard that. "Zhu Mama has a gentle temperament and will be able to get along well with Yu Xiang, Ruelan, and Luya." As she said that, she held Kaishir's hands with both hands and smiled. "Nanny, thank you for your help this time." Kaishir looked at Qin Huaining with eyes full of love and said with a smile, "Miss, what are you saying? I've nursed you, so I'll say something that's out of line. In my heart, I treat you like my own child. How can I watch you suffer? Don't worry, there's still a long way to go. The Prime Minister's residence is still deep. These words entered Qin Yining's heart. She gratefully hugged Kaisher and smiled. Let's go to Xingning Garden to pay our respects to Mother. Kaisher smiled. That newcomer might not even know the rules of the province. Qin Yining put on the red silk cloak that a maidservant handed to her and smiled. She will understand in the future, but by the time she understood, it would be too late. Her uncouth reputation had already spread. Qin Yining brought Kaisher and Bai Tong to Xingning Garden. Chapter 7. From afar, Qin Huaining saw the person leisurely walking over under the setting sun, and her pupils shrank. Qin Yining was tall and beautiful. As she walked, her honey-colored cloak opened slightly, revealing a long yellow dress that rippled like a goose. The ripples were light, making her gait appear very graceful. There was a hint of vigor in her weakness. Her back was straight, and when she saw Qin Huaining, she smiled slightly. Her appearance resembled Prime Minister Qin's when he was young, making Qin Huaining feel that she had lost out. Taking a deep breath, Qin Huaining told herself, I am the legitimate daughter. I am proficient in zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. He is just a barbarian. Surviving in this large residence is a walk in the park for me. Qin Yining should be the one who is nervous. After mentally preparing herself, Qin Huaining smiled and walked over to Qin Yining. She took the initiative to hold her hands and curtsied. Younger sister Xiao Shi, you've come. I was just about to order someone to go to Snow Pear Courtyard to invite you here. There are rules in the family regarding morning and evening. She still didn't let go of the matter of how she addressed her. This person wasn't done yet. Qin Yining smiled and returned the greeting. Miss Huaining, thank you for your kindness. It's just that Mother Jean thought of telling me about the rules in the morning first, so I didn't make a fool of myself in front of the First Madam. However, I appreciate your kindness. Hearing the words, Miss Huaining, Qin Huaining's smile instantly stiffened. When she heard that it was Mother Jean who told her, she couldn't help but begin to doubt the First Madam's attitude. She discreetly glanced at Kaisher beside her. Kaisher immediately understood and blinked her eyes. Qin Huaining took Qin Yining's hand and walked into Xingning Garden. She gently said, You've just returned, so you don't know much about the Fu. If you need anything, you can ask me. Although I'm not talented, I still know some of the most basic rules. She was implying that Qin Yining didn't even know the most basic rules. Thank you for Huaining, Mississippi. Father will personally arrange for the teachers and the nannies to explain these matters. Qin Yining spoke slowly and in an extremely amiable manner, but I grew up in the countryside. Naturally, I can't compare to Miss Huaining's good fortune of growing up in the Prime Minister's mansion. He was implying that she was like a turtle dove occupying a magpie's nest, and yet she was so proud of herself. The two of them walked to the corridor and looked at each other with smiles on their faces. At first, Qin Huaining kept staring into Qin Yining's eyes. She didn't know if it was because Qin Yining resembled her father, but her eyes seemed to be able to see through everything. There was also a kind of sharp coldness that belonged to a wild beast, causing Qin Huaining to involuntarily dodge. When she realized what she had done, she began to sulk again. Who would have thought that Qin Yining's sharpness was not at all weak? Fourth young lady, Miss Huaining is here. The head maidservant Kai Ju's voice broke the silence. She curtsied and lifted the warm curtain to one side. Qin Huaining's mood immediately fell to the bottom of the valley. That fourth young lady was no longer a form of address for her. Because of her father's words, she had already been demoted from a legitimate daughter to an adopted daughter. Qin Yining clearly saw her expression and slightly furrowed her brows. The dim yellow light cast a faint halo on the ground beneath their feet. A wave of heat and a faint fragrance of melons and fruits wafted over, as if spring had arrived. They each handed their cloaks to the maidservants to put away. Qin Yining couldn't help but blink her large, misty eyes curiously as she looked around. She originally thought that the place she lived in was already very good. Now that she was in Xingning Garden, she finally understood what it meant to be gorgeous. At the very least, the warmth here was something she didn't have at home. After bypassing the screen and arriving at the side hall, Qin Huaining smiled sweetly and said, Mother, have you eaten dinner yet? She curtsied and quickly walked forward to sit next to the Sun Clan. She looked at Qin Yining as if she was demonstrating her power. Qin Yining properly curtsied and called out, "Madam." He somewhat envied Qin Huaining for being so close to the Sun Clan. The Sun Clan patted Qin Huaining's hand and looked at Qin Yining with a complicated expression. She coldly said, "You should also sit down. Have you eaten dinner yet?" Kaiju immediately brought over the embroidered stool and placed it 5 steps away from the Sun Clan. Qin Yining sat down sideways and looked at Qin Huaining's seat and the Sun Clan's tightly clasped hands. Her eyes gradually grew cold and she politely and properly lowered her eyes and said, "Madam, I've already eaten." The Sun Clan uttered an "oh" and didn't know what else to say. The atmosphere was somewhat stiff. Qin Huaining seemed to understand her birth mother's predicament and said with a smile, "Is Shaoxi used to living in Snow Pear Courtyard? Do you still lack anything?" The Sun Clan immediately said, "That's right. If you lack anything, just tell the servants and have them prepare it." She nodded approvingly at Qin Huaining's nose. That intimate gesture made Qin Yining feel even more like an outsider. In fact, when the Sun Clan suspected that she was an outside daughter, she was already an outsider, right? Qin Yining buried her expectations and disappointment deep in her heart. The corners of her mouth curled up in self-mockery, and 2 small dimples appeared on her cheeks. "Yes, thank you for your concern, madam." The Sun Clan looked at Qin Yining with a slightly gentle gaze. A girl who was so similar to Qin Huaiyuan and didn't have a hateful personality really made it difficult for people to dislike her. However, she still had doubts in her heart and wasn't sure if she was really an outside daughter. Seeing that the Sun Clan's attitude had softened, Qin Huaining felt uneasy and asked coquettishly, "Mother, where is father? Is he coming back today?" When the Sun Clan heard this, half of their faces darkened. Qin Huaiyuan had 4 concubines, and today was concubine Hua's turn. Qin Huaiyuan had just sent someone to say that he wasn't coming back today. The Sun Clan couldn't help but feel angry when she thought about how the husband and wife had just quarreled because of this girl in front of them and couldn't see each other at night to ease their relationship. The way she looked at Qin Yining was filled with unconcealable disgust and couldn't help but say some harsh words. "Master dotes on you and has already sent someone to the palace to invite a nanny to teach you etiquette. She'll be here early tomorrow morning and has also spent a lot of money to invite a tutor for you. This is a privilege that Sister Hui and the others didn't have." The more the Sun Clan said, the more jealous she felt. She had already convinced herself that Qin Huaiyuan was treating Qin Yining so well because he was good to that outside daughter. She couldn't help but raise her voice. "I don't care where your mother is right now. Since you've come to the Prime Minister's estate, you have to abide by the rules of the Prime Minister's estate. When I tell you to study, you study carefully. Don't think about slacking off or making excuses. People like us will have many opportunities to show our faces in the future. If you make a fool of yourself outside and lose face for the Prime Minister's estate, I'll skin you alive." Hearing the Sun Clan's reprimand, Qin Yining had already stood up. At this moment, her face was expressionless as her long eyelashes drooped down. She felt as if a piece of flesh had been cut out of her heart by the Sun Clan's knife-like words and then frozen into a lump of ice by her ice-cold blood. Her birth mother had repeatedly refused to acknowledge her and doubted her origins. This had truly broken her heart. It had only been half a day since she'd returned to the estate, but her grandmother was displeased with her, her relatives were suspicious of her, her servants bullied her, and even her birth mother treated her like this. Could it be that she'd come back to be bullied? She'd endured it again and again, thinking that she could rely on her loveliness and sensibility to move these people's hearts. But what did she get in return? Perhaps she'd been too naive and had imagined the life of a distinguished family to be too beautiful. Everyone who lived here was not stingy with their malicious intentions. Even though they clearly weren't in their way, they still wished that they could trample on others to show off their greatness. These people were even more frightening than wild beasts. Wild beasts ate humans to survive. They ate humans for their own selfish desires. Qin Yining suddenly understood that blindly showing weakness and giving in would not be met with pity. If she continued to show weakness and gentleness, she was afraid that one day she would be poisoned to death by the people around her. "Madam, Are you still unwilling to believe my identity? You've been married to Father for many years. Have you ever seen Father deceive you over such a matter? Father doesn't have many children. If he really had a bloodline, he could have openly brought it back and no one would say anything about it. Why would he deceive a woman like you? You're making groundless accusations. You don't care about hurting your daughter's heart, but don't tell me you don't care about hurting Father's heart? Sun Clan's face flushed red. Just the words, "he doesn't have many children," had already pierced her heart, not to mention the questions that followed. Because Qin Huayuan didn't have many children, she was often disliked by her mother-in-law. She couldn't bear children, so she could only allow Qin Huayuan to take in concubines. However, concubines also couldn't bear children. This could only mean that there was something wrong with Qin Huayuan. However, her crafty mother-in-law blindly believed that she was jealous of concubines and used drugs on them. Now that this little wench had openly brought it up, how could she not be angry? You shut up. Sun Clan's hand trembled as she pointed at Qin Yining. Who do you think you are? This madam taught you a few words, and you actually dared to talk back. You dared to open a dye house just because I gave you some face. Someone come. Teach this wild girl a lesson. Sun Clan's head servant, Kaiju, was called over. Kaiju complied and rolled up her sleeves to slap her. However, when she raised her head and saw Qin Yining's icy gaze, she immediately felt a chill run down her spine. She couldn't bring her hand down. She thought to herself that this young lady was truly a savage. Her gaze was like that of a wild beast's. Sun Clan's heart felt uncomfortable from Qin Yining's icy gaze. She strode forward, pushed Kaiju aside, and raised her hand to give Qin Yining a slap across the face. Qin Yining covered his face. The look in his eyes changed from disbelief to understanding. Sun Clan's hand was numb from the slap, but her heart felt much better. She grabbed Qin Yining's lapel and said hatefully, "Whether or not you're my daughter, I'll naturally investigate. However, whether or not you are or not, it's not up to you to speak in front of me. Qin Ming doesn't have many children, so how can that be my fault? If you want to seek justice for him, then you can only acknowledge him as your father. You don't need to think of acknowledging a woman like me as your mother." "Madam, please calm down." Mother Jean saw that Sun Clan was about to say anything, so she hurriedly came forward to persuade her. Qin Yining also helped Sun Clan to the side to sit down. With tears in her eyes, she persuaded, "Mother, don't be angry. It's all my fault. If I hadn't been brought here, this wouldn't have happened, and you wouldn't have been wronged. Mother, if you continue to be angry, wouldn't you be stabbing a knife into my heart?" Sun Clan pursed her lips when she heard this, and tears streamed down her face. Sun Clan didn't know why, but when she saw the girl who was stunned by her slap, she felt a little guilty and distressed. She thought that whether or not Qin Ming was her biological daughter, as a legal mother, she had to teach her when she needed to. Only then did she suppress her guilt and say coldly, "Why haven't you left yet?" Qin Yining looked at Qin Huaning's attitude and learned a few things. She lowered her head and hid her cold smile, but her voice was very gentle. "Madam, please calm down." Sun Clan didn't look at her. Qin Yining was about to leave. Chapter 8. The Sun Clan didn't expect Qin Huayuan to suddenly return. She didn't know how much of her words had been overheard by him. Feeling slightly guilty, she blurted out, "Why are you back? Isn't it concubine Hua's turn today?" Qin Huayuan's brows furrowed even tighter. Stupid woman. She could say anything in front of her daughter. "You two go out first. Father has something to say to your mother. Mother Jean, bring the best ointment for 4th young Mississippi. What if her face swells up tomorrow?" Mother Jean nodded. Yes. However, she didn't move. She glanced at the Sun Clan worriedly. She was the wet nurse of the Sun Clan. Naturally, she knew the temperament of the Sun Clan. She was afraid that she would say something she shouldn't in front of Qin Huang. She wanted to stay behind and advise her, but because Qin Huayuan had just ordered her to get the ointment, it wouldn't be good for her to stay. Qin Huayuan saw Mother Jin's hesitation and sneered. "What? Mother Jin, could it be that you only care about your madam's orders and treat my words as nothing? Or are you afraid that this official will bully your madam?" After all, he was someone who had been an official for many years. How could a servant like Mother Jean withstand his imposing aura? Mother Jean was so frightened that her legs trembled. She repeatedly apologized. This servant doesn't dare. This servant will go and apply the ointment for fourth young Mississippi. Her face was covered in dirt as she followed the two young misses out of the room and carefully closed the door for her master. Unsurprisingly, the Sun Clan's shrill voice couldn't be stopped by the thin door at all. It couldn't be resisted as it traveled into the ears. Qin Ming, you came back to your room to show off your power. If you have the ability, then go outside and show off. What's the point of glaring at a woman? Mother Jean felt a headache coming on because of her madam's ruckus. When she looked up, she saw Qin Yining and Qin Huaining standing in the corridor. She hurriedly pulled on their arms and said in a low voice, "Miss, don't be here." Thinking of Qin Huayuan's instructions and seeing Qin Huaining's worried expression, Jan Mama thought for a moment and directly brought the two of them to the side room next to the main room that served as a tea room. She said in a low voice, "Miss, please sit for a moment. This servant will bring the medicine for 4th Mississippi." Qin Yining nodded and didn't thank him this time. The burning pain from the slap on her face by her biological mother made her realize the reality. It hadn't even been 12 hours since she returned to the residence. How much pomp and extravagance had she endured? Old Madam looked down on her, her biological mother didn't recognize her, and the rest of the people acted according to the wind. Even the maidservants dared to brazenly steal her things. After she found out, they even embezzled her charcoal. This adopted daughter, who had taken over her nest, had instigated discord time and time again. These people clearly saw that she had no one to rely on in the Qin residence and wanted to bully her, this soft persimmon. She had the temperament of someone who would rather die standing than kneel and live. She was able to persevere and survive against the cold and indifferent ways of the world. How could she easily admit defeat? Qin Yining didn't lack the patience to hunt, and she didn't lack the courage to confront a wild wolf. She had hope for familial love, but it didn't mean that she would be endlessly patient. Her white hand lightly caressed her cheek, her fingertips pinching the red and swollen area as if she was torturing herself. However, a cold smile bloomed on her lips. Mother Jean was upset and didn't pay attention to these details. However, Qin Yining saw Qin Yining's bloodthirsty smile, which was like a ferocious beast staring at its prey. She actually felt somewhat flustered in her heart. Just as she was about to say something, the quarrel between Qin Huayuan and the Sun Clan next door faintly entered her ears. Prime Minister Qin's voice was low, and his words were short. The Sun Clan's voice was sharp, and their complaints were incessant. At first, they couldn't hear clearly, but later on, the Sun Clan changed to roaring. It was hard for the two of them not to eavesdrop even if they wanted to. "Even a girl like Sister Hui can see through it. As her husband, you still want to deceive me. How could I have been so blind to marry you back then? If it weren't for my father's help, could you have a meteoric rise? You can be the Prime Minister today, but you don't know how to be grateful to our Ding General Manor. You don't know how to treat me better, and you even dare to use a mistress to deceive me." "Shut up." Qin Meng's voice was furious. "Stupid, jealous woman, I don't want to bother with you." Bang! It was the sound of the lattice door of the main room next door being kicked open. At the same time, the two of them heard the screams of the Sun Clan breaking down. Qin Yining and Qin Huaining quickly walked out of the side room, just in time to see Qin Huayuan's extremely cold back under the night sky as he angrily walked away. The Sun Clan's hysterical cries pierced their eardrums. "Why is my life so hard?" The two of them turned around and saw the Sun Clan sitting on the threshold, hugging the door frame with tears and snot streaming down her face. She almost fainted. "Please get up, the floor is cold." Qin Yining frowned and went to help her up, but her outstretched hand was waved away halfway by Qin Huaining. Qin Huaining pushed Qin Yining away and pulled the Sun Clan up. She choked with sobs and said, "Sister Xiaoxi, isn't it enough that you've caused so much trouble in our family? Now you want to poke Mother's heart?" Her words caused the Sun Clan to glare at Qin Yining. Wasn't that right? If she hadn't returned, how could there have been so many waves? Even though he clearly knew that she was a weak woman, Qin Huayuan actually didn't care whether she was sad or not. He refused to coax her and just left in a huff. She had just reprimanded Qin Yining and slapped him, but Qin Ming was already like that. It was enough to see what kind of vixen his mistress was. The Sun Clan's eyes were red as she pushed Qin Yining with both hands and shouted, "You wastrel! Ever since I received news of you, I haven't had a good day. Get out of my way." She turned around and shouted at Mother Jean, "Nanny, prepare a carriage for me. I want to go back to Duke Dingwa's estate." Mother Jean was so frightened that her face turned pale. She hurriedly advised, "Madam, it's almost time for the curfew. I'm afraid it's not good for you to go back rashly. Why don't you rest for today and go back first thing in the morning tomorrow? We'll also have something to explain to old Madam. No, I must go back now. I can't stay in the Prime Minister's estate anymore. Qin Ming is forcing me to my death." The Sun Clan's daughter sobbed, "Nanny, if you don't allow it, you can stay here by yourself. I'll leave by myself." The angry Sun Clan didn't care about Qin Huaining anymore. She shook off her daughter's hand and walked out. Qin Huaining staggered 2 steps. She couldn't stand steadily. If Bitong hadn't supported her in time and Nanny Kai hadn't pulled her from behind, Qin Huaining would have fallen down the steps. Qin Huaining frowned in dissatisfaction. The Sun Clan's tantrum couldn't be dissuaded. Mother Jean could only order a maid to quickly prepare a carriage. Kai Lan went to fetch the Sun Clan's large fur collar cloak and exquisite brass heater. She also gave a look to the head maidservant, Kai Ju, and whispered a few words to her. At this time, the master and mistress of the eldest branch were quarreling. They couldn't hide the news that their madam had returned to her maternal home. It was better for them to go directly to old madam. This was to prevent others from changing the meaning of the message midway and making the second and third branches a joke. Kaiju had a bitter face and helplessly went to see Ai Shao Garden. Mother Jean and Kai Lan supported the sobbing Sun Clan's daughter and left Xing Ning Garden as soon as they passed by. The courtyard, which was noisy just a moment ago, quieted down in an instant. The last trace of sunset quietly disappeared behind the mountains, leaving only a bright crescent moon hanging in the sky. Half of it was covered by the dark clouds, and the quiet courtyard of Xingning Garden was dyed a gloomy blue. The young maidservants were so scared that they didn't dare to breathe loudly. They tiptoed over and hung up the palace lanterns in the corridor. The warm orange light gradually spread out and cast a circle of light in the corridor. Qin Yining sneered at Qin Huaining. Qin Huaining was flustered by her stare. She took a handkerchief and wiped her tears. Sobbing, she said, "Xiaoxi Mimi, don't blame older sister for speaking too much. Mother was like that just now. How could I not advise her? Your words were equivalent to poking Mother's heart. After all, you haven't been by Mother's side all these years. You don't know her difficulties, so it's normal for you to say the wrong thing." Seeing Qin Yining slowly walking towards her, Qin Huaining smiled in a friendly manner. She said, "Xiaoxi Mimi's face is very swollen. I have a high-quality ointment that can stop the pain and reduce the swelling. I'll have Bai Tong send it over to you later." "Is that so? Then I'll have to thank you." Qin Yining stood in front of Qin Huaining. Her bright almond eyes flashed with a deep cold light, making Qin Huaining feel as if she had met a hungry wolf. No need to be polite." Qin Huaining couldn't help but nervously gulp. "You and I are sisters. We slap." The crisp sound of a slap resounded through the sky. Qin Huaining's ears buzzed and she saw stars. Her body tilted and she fell to the ground. She didn't react for a long time. Mother Kai, Bai Tong, Ruelan, and Xiao Lu were all stunned. They even forgot to help her up. "You don't have to send me your ointment. Keep it for yourself." "You." Qin Huaining, who was stunned by the slap, came back to her senses. Blood dripped from the corner of her mouth as she screamed in a muffled voice, "How dare you hit me?" "Yes, I hit you." Qin Yining leaned forward and slapped her again. After all, she was a hunter and a woodcutter. Her strength was not to be underestimated. Both slaps landed on the same spot. Slap after slap, half of Qin Huaining's face quickly became red and swollen. "You wild hussy, how dare you hit me? Men, arrest her." Qin Huaining pointed at Qin Yining and screamed. Mother Kai and Bai Tong finally reacted. They rolled up their sleeves and were about to rush forward. Even Ruelan was eager to try and arrest Qin Yining. Unexpectedly, the three of them rushed forward. Two of them grabbed her arms, and one grabbed her hair. However, none of them touched Qin Yining's clothes. Instead, they were thrown to the ground by her. Qin Yining stepped on Ruelan's back with her left foot. She held Mother Kai's arm with one hand and Bai Tong's throat with the other. The three of them were in so much pain that their faces turned pale. Bai Tong was so scared that she held her breath and didn't dare to move. She exerted force on her foot. Ruelan immediately cried out, "Ouch!" Qin Yining sneered, "I don't care about other people, but you are my servant. Instead of protecting your master, you came here to kill me. You don't want to live anymore. Miss, please spare my life." Ruelan's voice broke as she begged for mercy. The servants in Xingning Garden, who had wanted to fight with Qin Yining, were all pale. They didn't want to go forward anymore. They were all silent. How could they dare to look at Qin Yining with contempt? Qin Huaining struggled to get up. She staggered behind the pillar and hid. You wild hussy. You uneducated, poor hussy." "Yes, I am a hussy." Qin Yining pushed Mother Kai and Bai Tong away. She stepped over Ruelan's back and went straight to Qin Huaining. Chapter 9. "You lowly wench. Vicious whore. You're shameless." Qin Huaining shrieked in a trembling voice. "Who's the shameless one?" Qin Yining grabbed Qin Huaining's collar, and their eyes met. "I've never thought of harming you. We could have lived in harmony, but you incited discord in every possible way. Not only did you cause Mother to misunderstand me, but you also caused Father and Mother to be at odds with each other. You're just an adopted daughter who took over a magpie's nest. When I'm in a good mood, I treat you as a person. When I'm in a bad mood, who do you think you are?" Qin Huaining was so angry that her eyes turned red. However, she was just a weak and well-bred young lady. How could she compete with a savage who lived in the wilderness all year round? Since she couldn't fight, she could only threaten. "Aren't you afraid that grandmother will kick you out if she finds out about you treating me like this?" "What a joke. I've already hit you. Why would I be afraid of this? At worst, I'll just go back to being a savage and live a carefree life." Qin Yining's cold gaze swept over the servant girls in the courtyard who were already scared stiff. She then looked at Kaishur, Ruelan, and the others who couldn't get up. She smiled slightly, revealing her white teeth. In the dim light of the night, those white teeth coupled with her bloodthirsty expression made people feel a chill from the bottom of their hearts. "Let me tell you, I've even killed and eaten wild wolves, let alone you. I didn't argue with you because I felt it wasn't worth it. Do you think I'm afraid? Don't forget, even if you look down on me, I'm still my father's legitimate daughter." She exerted force in her hand and pulled Qin Huaining outside. Let's go. Let's go see the old madam. You instigated discord between father and mother. Don't think I'll let you off easily." For so many years, Qin Huaining had grown up in the Prime Minister's manor as the only legitimate daughter of Qin Huaiyuan. The old madam doted on her as if she was her own flesh and blood. When had she ever been touched by anyone? Now that she had been slapped in the face and had her clothes pulled, Qin Huaining had long collapsed. She struggled, cried, and cursed. She cursed all kinds of dirty and smelly things. It was simply unbearable to hear. However, Qin Yining only grabbed her by the collar. He looked so relaxed that it didn't seem like he was pulling a person, but more like he was holding a chicken waiting to be slaughtered. Scold her all you want, but let's see what kind of good daughter the Prime Minister's manor taught is like. Qin Yining had a pair of heavenly legs. He lived in the mountains all year round and could climb mountains as if they were flat ground. At this moment, it was natural for him to feel the wind beneath his feet. However, Qin Huaining was a 3-inch golden lotus. He bent over and struggled to catch up. Even if he jogged, he could not catch up. Instead, he staggered and swayed as he walked. He couldn't be persuaded, he couldn't be scolded, he couldn't be pushed away, and he couldn't beat him. No matter how hard she struggled, she could not break free from the hand that was tightly gripping her collar. She tried her best to signal the servants with her eyes, but no one dared to help her. Qin Yining led her all the way to Si Shao Garden without any hindrance, as if he was carrying a prey. The servants following behind him were like a bunch of dumplings, and none of them dared to speak loudly. When they arrived at the door, Qin Huaining finally saw that she was going to see her relatives. She cried loudly, "Grandmother, save me! Someone wants to kill me!" This scream spread far and wide, scaring old Madam in the room so much that she almost dropped the tobacco pipe in her hand. Just now, old Madam heard that her eldest daughter-in-law had brought someone back to her maternal home. She was so angry that her face turned pale. Mammy Qin spent a lot of effort to persuade old Madam to stop. She had just lit a tobacco pipe, but before she could take a puff, the burning tobacco stuck to her snow-white petticoat and immediately burned a hole. "Ayo, old Madam." Mammy Qin quickly poured a cup of tea to put out the fire. Then, she hurriedly checked old Madam to see if she had any burns or scalds. Fortunately, the weather was cold, so she had worn cotton-padded pants early on. Thus, she was able to avoid a disaster. Old Madam's face turned ashen as she threw away the tobacco pipe. She shrieked, "Who dares to make such a racket?" The maidservant outside the door seemed to be scared and stuttered, replying to old Madam, "It's fourth young lady and young lady Huaining." Old Madam frowned and stood up. "What do these two hoofs want to do in the middle of the night? I think the Sun Clan is a disorderly family. What kind of things have they taught?" "Old Madam, please calm down. This servant will help you change your clothes first." Mammy Qin and the head maidservant Ji Xiang hurriedly persuaded old Madam. They deftly helped old Madam change into her petticoat, draped her in the peacock blue satin coat, and put on the headband inlaid with sapphires. After tidying up, old Madam's anger dissipated a little. With a heavy expression, she took Mammy Qin and Ji Xiang to the reception pavilion used for the banquet. As soon as they entered, they saw Qin Huaining and Qin Yining kneeling on the ground. Both of them had red and swollen faces. Half of Qin Huaining's face was even more swollen. Her makeup was ruined from crying, and her face was covered with tears and snot. After seeing old Madam, Qin Huaining finally saw her family. She cried loudly and went forward on her knees to hug old Madam's thigh. She cried as if the sky was going to collapse. She choked with sobs and couldn't form a sentence. When old Madam saw her like this, she immediately leaned over to support her with heartache. She called out in her heart, "What's wrong? Don't cry." She anxiously asked Kai Shi and Qiu Lu, who had followed her, "Tell me, what happened?" Kai Shi's arm was still in pain. Her lips were trembling, but she couldn't make a sound. Qiu Lu lowered her head and didn't speak as usual. Qin Yining calmly said, "Old Madam, please calm down. Qin Huaining instigated discord between my father and mother. My father was so angry that he went to the outer courtyard, and my mother was so angry that she returned to her maternal home. I've already taught her a lesson. Old Madam, don't get angry and harm your body. If you want to punish her, you can leave it to the servants." "What?" Old Madam frowned. She was originally angry because of the Sun Clan's return to her maternal home. She didn't expect this matter to be related to Qin Huaining, whom she doted on dearly. Qin Huaining repeatedly shook her head. With a swollen face, she said vaguely, "No, it's not like that. It's Mother who suspected that Xiao Shi was an illegitimate daughter. Mother only slapped Xiao Shi and scolded her a little. Father's heart ached and he quarreled with Mother." Qin Huaining inverted right and wrong in a righteous manner. Mama Kai also said, replying to old Madam, "Fourth young miss is really too domineering. Not only did she slap Miss Huaining, she also slapped this servant and two other servant girls. This servant is still in so much pain that I can't even lift my arm." As she said that, she knelt down and groaned while holding her arm. Mammy Qin looked at everyone. Then, she and Ji Xiang supported old Madam to the arhat bed next to the window that was covered with thick brocade mattresses. They also brought a hand warmer to warm old Madam. While they were walking and sitting down, old Madam calmed down a little. Today, when Qin Huaining returned to the Fu, she gave her the impression that she was a well-behaved, steady, and somewhat timid country girl. She didn't believe that she dared to hit people on the first day she returned to the Fu. However, looking at the slap mark on Qin Huaining's face, everything couldn't be fake. Old Madam didn't immediately stand up for her, which made Qin Huaining panic. She secretly thought in her heart, they are indeed a family with blood relations. Her biological granddaughter came back, but she didn't treat her as an important person. Qin Huaining was flustered and anxious. In her agitation, she didn't care about what she said. Grandmother, no matter what, she hit me like this. She also hit my wet nurse and maidservant. That's her fault. How can a daughter of a respectable family directly hit people like this? If this spread out, where will our Xiang Fu's face be put? Isn't this throwing away my father's face? This kind of barbarian is simply... Shut up. Although Qin Yining was kneeling, her back was straight. Her eyebrows, which were similar to Qin Huayuan's, emitted a cold light. Her long eyebrows were tightly knitted, and her aura was biting cold. In front of old madam, you still want to drive a wedge between us? Mother originally didn't suspect my identity. It was you who explicitly hinted that made mother suspect that I was an outside daughter. However, father's character is upright and upright. He can just bring whoever he likes back to the Fu. Why would he secretly raise a concubine outside? Even if he really had an outside daughter, wouldn't he have the responsibility to directly bring her back to the Fu? Moreover, father disdained to do this. With his character and talent, there are countless young ladies rushing to enter the Fu to be his concubine. When has father's heart ever been moved? However, you incited mother to suspect father and made them drive a wedge between each other. Only when the family is harmonious can everything prosper. Qin Huaining, for your own selfish reasons, you repay kindness with enmity. Has your conscience been eaten by a dog? Qin Huaining angrily refuted. Don't speak as if you are in the right. Didn't you do it for yourself? She said that you were the D-daughter, but who knows what happened in the past. It's human nature for mother to suspect you. Moreover, I didn't instigate anything. Father does things openly and upright. He said that it was an investigation by the staff. Could it be false? You even dare to say this in front of old madam, and you still say that you didn't instigate anything? After Qin Yining finished speaking, she turned to look at old madam. Qin Huaining's body shook when she heard this. Her heated head gradually calmed down. Only then did she realize that she had fallen into a trap. This barbarian wasn't a fool. She actually took advantage of her being full of grievances and agitation to incite her to say those words. However, the words that were said were like spilled water. How could they be taken back? Old madam's brows were tightly knitted. She was somewhat dissatisfied with Qin Huaining in her heart. Old madam didn't doubt Qin Yining's bloodline at all. That face seemed to be carved from the same mold as Qin Huayuan. Could it be fake? Although it was true that she was partial to Qin Huaining, it was just as Qin Huayuan had said. The bloodline of a large family couldn't be mixed up. A biological child was a biological child, and an adopted child was an adopted child. Old madam indeed didn't like Qin Yining. However, even if she didn't like her, she was still the only D-daughter of her eldest son whom she valued the most. Old madam also indeed liked Qin Huaining. However, no matter how much she liked her, she was still just an adopted daughter. Now, an adopted daughter stirred up trouble between her son and daughter-in-law in order to stabilize her own position. This caused the family to be at odds with each other, causing her impulsive and brainless eldest daughter-in-law to return to her maternal home. She didn't know how the in-laws would misunderstand her. Moreover, when this matter spread out tomorrow, she didn't know how the nobles would discuss it. They didn't know where to put their family Qin's face. Qin Yining was wrong to hit people. However, old madam had been in charge of the inner residence for many years. She could still clearly distinguish the root cause of the matter. Old madam's face darkened as she looked at Qin Huaining. It was difficult to hide her disappointment. Old madam's disappointed gaze made Qin Huaining understand what alienation was. The ridicule in her heart deepened. Sure enough, you are a family. You're completely treating me as an outsider. You said that you dote on me the most. Now, aren't you still partial to your biological granddaughter? Old madam looked at Qin Huaining's sobbing appearance. In the end, she couldn't bear to part with her. Even if it was a kitten or a puppy that had been raised for a long time, there would be feelings, let alone a little girl who was as beautiful as a flower. Even if she was an adopted daughter, there were still feelings for her for more than 10 years. Chapter 10. Qin Yining lowered her eyes. From the way old madam addressed her and her slightly soft tone, she had already guessed some of her thoughts. She immediately bowed obediently and took advantage of the situation to say, "Grandmother is right. Granddaughter was just anxious. I won't do it again in the future." If she only knew how to be rough, then she would really become a savage. Using both hardness and gentleness was the most appropriate attitude. Old madam nodded in satisfaction upon seeing the situation. The expression on her face was obviously more relaxed. As an elder, what she disliked the most was the younger generation contradicting her face to face. Although Qin Yining was a bit rough, she wasn't a bad person at the root. She was so similar to her eldest son. Presumably, her thoughts wouldn't be bad. On the other hand, Qin Huaining, old madam, who had seen 1,000 sales, felt more and more of a headache. Thinking about what kind of rumors would spread outside tomorrow, she felt her heart suffocating. She said in a low voice, "Today's matter, you should all learn a lesson. As the young misses of the Prime Minister's manor, sisters don't get along well and actually fought. What would it look like if word got out? You usually have a filial appearance. Is this how you are filial now?" Although old madam said, "you all," Qin Huaining's heart was like a mirror. How long had Qin Yining returned to the manor? She was the one who had been by old madam's side for a longer time. Old madam was stabbing her. Qin Huaining's heart was extremely terrified. Her biggest reliance in the manor now was old madam and the Sun clan. To be able to continue living the life of the young misses in the manor, she relied on their reluctance to part with them. If she lost their love and trust, what else could she have? "Grandmother, please calm down. Granddaughter knows her mistake." Qin Huaining didn't dare to refute anymore for fear that old madam would be even more annoyed with her. Today's grievances, she could only swallow her broken teeth and blood. Old madam saw her good attitude when admitting her mistake and thought that since she was a girl she had taught, her character wouldn't be bad. Although her thoughts were a bit heavy, it was also pardonable. With this in mind, she sternly said, "Sister E, Sister Hui, since you sisters don't get along well and neglect filial piety, I'll punish you to go back to your rooms and copy the Book of Filial Piety 10 times. 3 days later, when you wake up in the morning to pay your respects, do you have any objections?" "Thank you for your concern, grandmother," Qin Huaining hurriedly answered. When old madam heard this, her heart felt much better. She thought to herself, "Sister Hui is someone who knows what's good for her. She knows that I'm deliberately biased towards her." It must be known that Qin Huaining had grown up in the Prime Minister's residence and had been taught by the daughters of noble families. Writing was not a difficult task for her. However, Qin Yining was born in the countryside and rarely touched paper or pen. There were 18 sections in the classic of filial piety, and if she had to copy it 10 times in 3 days, she would be exhausted. In the end, old madam still cherished Qin Huaining, who was raised by her side, and was dissatisfied with Qin Yining hitting someone. However, as the head of the household, under the situation where Qin Huaining was clearly in the wrong, it wasn't good for her to openly side with anyone. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to manage the household in the future. However, old madam was wrong at this moment. Qin Huaining didn't understand her favoritism at all. She was already sneering in her heart. "What grandmother? What doting? It's all fake." As soon as her biological granddaughter came back, she was biased. Seeing me being beaten and wronged, she actually punished me to copy the book with her. Qin Yining took in the reactions of old madam and Qin Huaining from the corner of his eyes. He couldn't help but secretly laugh. It seemed that Qin Huaining was going to let down old madam's good intentions. Old madam rubbed the space between her eyebrows again. Ji Xiang, who was at the side, timely brought a bowl of warm honey water to moisten her throat. Mammy Qin stood at the side and skillfully massaged old madam's temples. Seeing old madam's tired face, Qin Yining and Qin Huaining bowed and asked to leave. Old madam faintly waved her hand. When she saw the two people leave, she instructed Mammy Qin, "Lu Juan, instruct someone to carry a lantern and send the two young ladies off." Mammy Qin immediately nodded in understanding and quickly followed them out. Qin Huaining lived in old madam's Ci Shao garden, but Qin Yining had to cross half of the rear residence to go to Snow Pear courtyard. Mammy Qin first called a young maidservant to come over and give a few instructions. The young maidservant immediately carried a lantern and chased after Qin Yining. Mammy Qin went to the warm room where Qin Huaining lived. The room was in chaos. The wet nurse, Kai Shi, and the head maidservant, Bai Tong, were both injured. Qin Huaining's face was now so swollen that it was unbearable to look at. The maidservants and older female servants were busily applying medicine. The room was filled with gasps and wails. No one noticed that Mammy Qin was still standing outside the window. At this time, Qin Huaining was already sobbing. The head maidservant, Bai Tao, hurriedly persuaded, "Young lady, don't cry. What if you hurt your eyes from crying?" If old madam knew, she would be distressed. Bai Tao didn't go out with them today, so she naturally wasn't clear about the details. She originally thought that by mentioning old madam's distress, she could calm the young lady's heart. Who knew that she would poke Qin Huaining's sore spot? Qin Huaining slapped Bai Tao's hand away. She wanted to complain about old madam's partiality, but she was afraid that she couldn't control her voice and would be heard by others. Thus, she sharply reprimanded, "Why are your hands so heavy? Don't you know how to apply medicine properly?" This servant didn't mean it. "Young lady, please forgive this servant." Bai Tao didn't understand, but she didn't dare to say more. She hurriedly knelt down and begged for forgiveness. Qin Huaining still felt that it wasn't enough to vent her anger. She lifted her foot and kicked Bai Tao's chest. "You lowly wench, poisonous whore. Jinx, you want to kill me, don't you? I'll kick you to death." Bai Tao cried out in pain, and her body fell to the ground. The maidservants in the room kept quiet out of fear. None of them dared to come forward to persuade her. Mammy Qin stood outside the window and heard the movements in the room clearly. She also understood in her heart. Miss Huaining clearly had resentment in her heart. She resented old madam. She was old madam's dowry. She hadn't married in her entire life, but she had stayed by old madam's side loyally. She had accompanied old madam through so many storms in Qin Manor. She was naturally loyal to old madam. Because of the convenience of her identity, she probably knew the character of the people around old madam better than her master. This Miss Huaining used to be very good. She was well-educated and well-behaved. She was the best among the sisters and was deeply loved by old madam. Who would have thought that once the matter came out, she would have the heart to fight and reveal such a nature? In the end, she wasn't First Master's biological daughter. Her character was a bit worse. Mammy Qin sighed softly. Taking advantage of the fact that there was no one around, she went to old madam's room. She wanted to tell old madam about the matter, but when she thought of old madam's partiality towards Qin Huaining, she was afraid that if she told the truth, old madam would dislike her. Therefore, after hesitating, she could only swallow her words. She thought that slowly reminding old madam was also a safe method. Today, Qin Yining came out to pay respects to the Sun Clan. She brought Ruelon and Xiao Lu with her. Ruelon had been taught a lesson by her and had already returned to Snow Pear Courtyard. Only Xiao Lu was left at her side, carrying a lantern. Under the curtain of the night, the long alley seemed to have no end. Occasionally, a gust of cold wind would sweep past, drilling straight into one's collar. The candlelight of the lanterns flickered, casting the shadows of the master and servant on the wall and on the ground. Qin Yining rubbed her ice-cold hands and said, "You didn't make a move today?" Xiao Lu was stunned when she heard this and said somewhat clumsily, This servant was scared." Qin Yining burst out laughing. "I know. You probably haven't seen a young miss hit people like me. But why didn't you help Huaining catch me?" Xiao Lu's face heated up. She thought the young miss was asking her why she didn't help her beat people up. "Miss, this servant is your servant. There's no reason for me to help an outsider. It's just, this servant has never seen a young miss hit people before. I was scared and didn't think to help you. By the time I remembered, they had already been beaten to the ground by you." When Qin Yining heard Xiao Lu's clumsy words, she couldn't help but feel her mood improve. From her observations, although Xiao Lu wasn't tactful, she was an extremely perceptive person. At the very least, she had someone she could use by her side. When Xiao Lu saw Qin Yining's gentle expression, her worried heart relaxed. She began to have a good impression of Qin Yining. She knew her own shortcomings. She was too inarticulate and didn't know how to take care of people. If she followed such a powerful fourth young miss in the future, at least she wouldn't be bullied. Just as the two of them were walking, they suddenly heard the sound of hurried footsteps behind them. It was the servant girl that Mammy Chin had instructed to come running over with a lantern in her hand. When they arrived, the servant girl bowed to Chin Yining and explained the purpose of her visit. Then, together with Chiu Lu, she supported Chin Yining as they walked towards Snow Pear Courtyard. As the servant girl walked, she carefully observed Chin Yining's expression and calmness. She thought to herself that she should go back and tell Mammy Chin that the fourth young miss was the same as when they first met. When they arrived in front of Snow Pear Courtyard, Chin Yining remembered that when she helped the owner of the medicine store deliver goods, she would receive 1 or 2 coins as a reward. Thus, she instructed Chiu Lu to give her a reward. She didn't know the rules of the estate, so she didn't know how much to reward. Chiu Lu used to follow the Sun Clan. Although she wasn't allowed to serve them personally, she was experienced and knowledgeable and knew the rules. She then grabbed a handful of copper coins from the pouch she carried with her as a reward. She sent the little servant girl away with a smile on her face and a look of joy on her face. Chin Yining praised, "You did very well." Chiu Lu blushed and looked at Chin Yining with sparkling eyes. When Chin Yining saw this, he couldn't help but smile. The two of them entered the courtyard. It was late and winter was about to begin. The quiet courtyard was filled with cold wind, and the rustling of the grass and trees seemed to be particularly loud. The servants were all in their rooms. Only a servant girl was squatting in the corner outside the room. She was fanning the fire in the charcoal stove. The orange-red sparks flickered and then disappeared. In the darkness, the warm light in the room was particularly bright. Chin Yining could faintly hear a woman complaining in the room. She remembered that this was the room that Ruelon and Yu Xiang lived in together. She walked towards the room with Chiu Lu. Before she could say anything, the servant girl who was fanning the stove was startled. The servant girl stood up. Just as she was about to salute and greet them, she was stopped by Chin Yining's cold gaze. Originally, she had listened to Yu Xiang's instructions and was about to report when she saw them. However, she was so frightened that she couldn't make a sound. The servant girl could only stand to the side with her head lowered. Chapter 11. It was as warm as spring in the wing room. Ruelon was sitting on the bed with a quilt in her arms. Her red and swollen cheeks had turned purple, which showed how hard she had been beaten. There was a plate of fried melon seeds on the small table at the head of the bed. Yu Xiang sat beside the small table and roasted the melon seeds by the fire. She pointed at the direction of the main room with her chin and scolded, "She doesn't even know where she came from. She just returned to our fu, and she's already so ostentatious. You see, old Madame dotes on fourth miss so much, but now fourth miss was beaten by her. Old Madame will peel off her skin." Yu Xiang's voice was getting louder and louder. She didn't care about it at all. Ruelon said anxiously, "My dear, keep your voice down. If Miss Yiling comes back and hears it, we can't stay in Snow Pear Yard anymore." "Are you afraid of her?" "I'm not afraid." Yu Xiang spat and wiped off the melon seed skin stuck to the corner of her mouth. "Didn't you see Madame and Madame's attitude towards her? She is also an idiot. She just came back and offended the two most powerful people in the mansion. Madame, her mother, doesn't like her. What good will she do in the future?" She threw the melon seed skin into the burning charcoal basin. A burnt smell gradually spread. Yu Xiang didn't seem to feel it. She still threw the melon seed skin into the charcoal basin and sneered, "We are also unlucky. We served in Xingning Garden. With our qualifications, we often served master. It's hard to guarantee that we can't be masters in the future. Now we are thrown in such a desolate place with a vulgar village girl. What good will we have in the future? It's really bad luck." This sentence really poked Ruelon's heart. Ruelon was only a second-class maid and didn't have many opportunities to serve Madame Li in Xingning Garden. However, the Prime Minister was so handsome that he could make her heart beat faster with just a glance. Besides, Madame Li didn't have any children. Ruelon herself was not bad, so she had some ideas long ago. She didn't expect that she would be sent to Snow Pear Yard and be beaten so badly on the first day. Thinking of Chin Yining's ferocious appearance, Ruelon felt a chill run down her spine. She couldn't help but frown and persuade her, You haven't seen how ferocious the girl is. I advise you to save yourself some trouble. No matter what, Miss is still the Prime Minister's daughter. So what if she's the daughter of the first wife? Doesn't she still have to live according to our wishes? Mother Jean is such a busybody. Why did she have to give her such good charcoal? She's used to collecting firewood in the mountains. I'm afraid she doesn't even know that there's such a dust-free silver charcoal. She then chuckled, but it's still convenient for us. You. Ruelon thought of how Qin Yining was not angry when he found out that his things had been confiscated. He even talked to them with a smile. Thinking of the main room, which was as cold as an ice cellar, she felt inexplicably happy. Yu Xiang cracked a few more melon seeds and suddenly laughed. She beat up Miss Huaning today. I don't know if she'll be able to come back. That's true. Raylan couldn't help but laugh. Just as they were secretly feeling happy, the door to the side room was suddenly pushed open with a creak. Both of them jumped in fright. They thought it was one of the young maidservants outside. Just as they were about to reprimand her, they were stunned when they saw who it was. The woman in front of the door was wearing a honey-colored cloak. She had a slender figure and a gorgeous appearance. Who else could it be other than the Qin Yining they were looking down on? When their eyes met, Ruelon saw the murderous intent in Qin Yining's cold eyes. Then she saw the faint smile on Qin Yining's lips. She couldn't help but feel the hair on her back stand. She hurriedly got off her shoes, ignoring the pain in her body. "Fourth Miss, you're back." Ruelon saluted. Yu Xiang's expression was also very ugly. She saluted with Ruelon. "Fourth Mississippi, I don't dare. I'm just a vulgar village girl. How can I accept your salute? After all, with Miss Yu Xiang's character, if you stay in Xingning Garden in the future, you may become a concubine." Qin Yining walked to the bedside with her hands behind her back. She looked at the high-quality silver frost charcoal in the stove and the melon seed shells that hadn't been completely burned in the charcoal fire. She smiled and said, "How is it? Mother Jean gave you good charcoal. Is there enough for you two? Do you want me to send some more?" Ruelon's heart skipped a beat. Her knees went soft and she knelt down. What they had just said had actually been heard by this poor family. This person was a person who killed people without batting an eye. Even if she killed them, she wouldn't do anything. At worst, when they reported to the government, they would be charged with a crime and paid 10 taels of silver. Even if old Madam didn't like her granddaughter, she wouldn't be reluctant to pay 10 taels of silver. Ruelon trembled and began to recall what she had said. Fortunately, it was just Yu Xiang, so she didn't say much. Thinking of this, Ruelon hurriedly kowtowed. "Miss, please calm down." "Calm down? I'm not angry. How can I calm down?" Qin Yining didn't look at Ruelon. She just looked at Yu Xiang with a slight smile. Yu Xiang saw that things had come to this, so she was more unyielding than expected. She arrogantly raised her chin and said, "Miss, you must be joking. Did you see who made me a concubine?" Qin Yining carefully looked Yu Xiang up and down. Her gaze was like a knife that had been tempered with ice, cutting Yu Xiang until she trembled all over. Yu Xiang felt that she was going to suffer. She didn't know how this person would deal with her. She was just a girl who had just returned to the Fu. She didn't understand the rules of a rich and powerful family. She was afraid that she wouldn't be punished. At most, she would be beaten a few times. Yu Xiang's heart calmed down a lot when she thought of this. Just as Yu Xiang was thinking about how to report to her parents for help, Qin Yining smiled mysteriously. "I want to copy the filial piety scriptures. Ruelon, help me grind the ink." It seemed that she wasn't going to be punished. Yu Xiang was secretly delighted. Ruelon also let out a sigh of relief.
Yes.
She stood up, but she pulled at the wound on her body. She hissed in pain. Yu Xiang reached out to help Ruelon up. She said with dissatisfaction, "Miss, you're too unreasonable. Ruelon is already like this. How can she serve the brush and ink? How about I go help you grind the ink? You can let Ruelon rest for today." Her tone was forceful, as if she was the master. Ruelon trembled all over. She said, "This servant is fine. This servant will go help Miss with the brush and ink immediately." Yu Xiang glared at Ruelon with dissatisfaction. She looked like she was going to stand up for her today. Qin Yining saw Yu Xiang's reaction and said with amusement, "Ruelon, come help me with the brush and ink. Yu Xiang, go boil the water. I want to take a bath." Yu Xiang's eyes widened. She was born in the house. Her parents were stewards in the outer yard. She had been outstanding among the servants since she was a child. She had to show her face when she walked around the masters. When had she ever done something as menial as boiling water? Miss, you've just returned to the manor. I'm afraid you don't understand. We're all single stewards. Each of us has our own duties. For example, the menial work of boiling water is naturally done by the servant girls. I've never heard of any of the other girls asking their senior servant girls to boil water. For the sake of your reputation, this servant will help Miss with the brush and ink. Yu Xiang not only expressed her dissatisfaction, but also unabashedly despised Qin Yining for not knowing the rules. Ruelon heard this and broke out in a cold sweat. She hurriedly said, "This servant is fine. This servant can serve Miss with the brush and ink." Yu Xiang was furious. She pinched Ruelon's arm hard. What was wrong with this person? She was standing up for her, but she didn't appreciate it. Ruelon frowned in pain and almost cried. Who was the master in this yard? Could it be that Miss Yu Xiang wants to be the master? Qin Yining turned and walked outside. He said without hesitation, "Yu Xiang, go boil water. The rest of you, follow me." Yes. The servant girls in the corridor all responded. Ruelon and Yu Xiang then realized that outside the small room, Mama Zhu, Qiulu, Luya, and the rest were all standing neatly. They didn't know how long they had been there. Ruelon hurriedly followed. Yu Xiang pursed her lips and reluctantly went to the small kitchen to boil water. In the main room, Luya and Qiulu were busy lighting the lamp. The servant girl followed Mama Zhu's instructions and went to prepare the charcoal. Qin Yining sat on a rose chair with a light green cushion in front of the black inscriptions desk. Ruelon immediately placed a porcelain bowl with a carp playing with a lotus within her reach. She also passed a delicate hand warmer to her. "Miss, you can write after you've warmed up." Qin Yining was very funny. This person had been beaten up, but he had become more attentive. It was enough to show that kind people were often bullied. The room gradually warmed up. Ruelon took out a brush, ink, paper, and inkstone. She laid out the rice paper and took out an ink stick to grind it carefully. Qin Yining casually picked up a weasel hairbrush. She used her slender fingers to play with the tip of the brush. She said slowly, "You all have been wronged by coming here to serve me. I've delayed your good future." "We don't dare." Mama Zhu took the lead. Ruelon, Qiulu, Luya, and the three servant girls all knelt down. Qin Yining chuckled, revealing her white teeth. Under the light, her bright face was even more charming. "Since you're in the Prime Minister's residence, you have to abide by the rules." Qin Yining put down the weasel hairbrush and looked straight at the people who were bowing. Her eyes were bright. She said slowly, "Since Mother Jean arranged for you to come to Snow Pear Courtyard, you are my people. I'm new here. Although I'm not familiar with the matters of the Prime Minister's residence and don't know the rules of a noble lady, the nannies and teachers who teach the rules will be here tomorrow. Do you think I'll never know anything?" "Miss, you're exaggerating." "We don't dare." Everyone kowtowed. In an instant, they were enlightened. There should be a limit to bullying strangers. Furthermore, this lady was the only child of the master. It was only a matter of time before she made a comeback. Qin Yining's words made everyone more cautious and respectful towards her. It also made these people who had abandoned their previous futures to come to Snow Pear Courtyard for the first time feel a sense of belonging. At least, they now felt that following this lady was not without a bright future. Chapter 12. However, looking at everyone's reaction, she knew that she had achieved her goal. Qin Yining's lips curled up and he continued, "Moreover, in a wealthy family, there has never been a rule of servants bullying the master. Even I, a savage, understand this principle. Presumably, all of you, who live in a prosperous family, also understand." As soon as Qin Yining finished speaking, Zhu Mama and Ruelon led everyone to kowtow again. "Yes, we understand." Nodding with satisfaction, Qin Yining continued, "Speaking of rules, it is a rule that I have to go to grandmother every day. It is a rule that all of you have to salute me when you see me. It is a rule that Qin Huaining instigated disharmony in our family and was taught a lesson by me. It is also a rule that grandmother made us copy the Book of Filial Piety together. All of you are sensible people. I don't need to explain to you what is right and wrong." The information revealed by his words shocked everyone. Old Madam's most beloved Huaning Miss was beaten up and was only punished to copy the Book of Filial Piety. Huaning Miss was beaten up and was punished to copy the Book of Filial Piety together with Fourth Miss? No one was a fool. They immediately understood that there must be a hidden story behind this matter. Huaning Miss might not be as innocent as the rumors said. Moreover, Old Madam's heart might not necessarily not cherish Fourth Mississippi Zhu Mama, Luya, and the rest instantly understood how powerful this young lady was. She had just returned to the residence for less than a day and had already made Huaning Miss suffer such a big loss without revealing anything. Raylan was trembling like a sieve in fear. Huaning Miss was so favored and was beaten until her face was swollen like a pig's head. However, Old Madam only punished Fourth Miss to copy the Book of Filial Piety together. Ruelon was only a servant. If her master beat her, then so be it. Old Madam's standards were so high that she wouldn't care. Yuxiang even said that she would complain tomorrow. Wasn't she seeking death? Thinking of this, Ruelon hurriedly kowtowed and said, "Miss, this servant knows her mistake. In the future, I will definitely serve Miss with all my heart. I won't dare to have half a word of complaint. Otherwise, let this servant grow a seed on top of my head and directly rot into my stomach." Such a heavy oath showed Ruelon's sincerity, and it also shocked those who heard it. Ruelon, who used to be respected in Madame's room, was now subdued by Fourth Young Lady. How could they be stronger than Ruelon? Everyone saluted to show their loyalty. Qin Yining smiled and waved his hand. "Forget it. Get up. I'm only telling you this to let you know what happened. After all, my mother was instigated by Qin Huaning, which caused her to quarrel with my father and return to her parents' home. This matter isn't my mother's fault. If anyone mentions it, you should know what to do." This sentence was an instruction for them to try their best to explain to others that Madame had been instigated by Qin Huaning. Everyone saluted and acknowledged. Qin Yining continued, "As for Miss Yuxiang, your ability to boil water is not as good as hers. Tonight, we'll have to trouble her. You should all learn from her. I'll still count on you to do these things in the future." Everyone said, yes, but in their hearts, they all understood that the young lady meant that they were not allowed to help Yuxiang. Moreover, the last sentence was hinting that Yuxiang wouldn't have the chance to boil water in the future. Qin Yining ordered everyone to leave, leaving only Ruelon to serve by his side. She picked up the weasel hair brush to recall the contents of the Book of Filial Piety and began to write from memory. Zhu Mama, Luya, and Qiu Lu brought the three maidservants out of the door. They looked at each other and then looked at the smoky little kitchen. They all felt their hair stand on end at the same time. The young lady was really too powerful. They had to be more careful in serving her in the future. Just as everyone in Snow Pear Courtyard was in awe, the news of the Sun Clan and Qin Huayuan quarreling and Qin Huaning being beaten up by Qin Yining spread like wildfire. Every branch knew about it. Moreover, the versions of the news were different, depicting many different meanings. In the dead of night, the originally quiet Duke Ding's residence suddenly became noisy. Duchess Ding's wife, Madame Zheng, heard the servant's reply and appeased the impatient Duke Ding. She put on a jacket and went to the warm room. When she saw her daughter with red and swollen eyes, she couldn't help but frown. "Sister Han, what are you doing?" The Sun Clan's daughter's name was Hai Han, and her nickname was Sister Han. Hearing her mother's familiar voice, the Sun Clan's daughter didn't care what her mother said and cried out in grievance. She threw herself at Duchess Ding and hugged her. "Mother, you have to uphold justice for your daughter. I'm going to be bullied to death by that bastard Qin Ming." Duchess Ding stumbled when the Sun Clan's daughter threw herself at her. If it weren't for Mother Bao, who was serving her, who quickly supported her, the mother and daughter would have fallen to the ground together. Duchess Ding reprimanded her unhappily. "Look at you. How old are you? You're still so careless. I look down on you. What time is it now? Instead of staying at home, you came back in the middle of the night and cried as soon as you saw me. Tell me, what's the big deal? Is the sky falling down?" Looking at the Sun Clan sobbing, Duchess Ding felt a headache coming on. When she was young, she was busy taking charge of the family and wanted to be a good wife. She couldn't fall behind in the family's affairs. She was also busy teaching her son, so she only let her mother-in-law teach the girls. Who knew that her mother-in-law only knew how to dote and teach the girls to be like this? Her daughter was so arrogant and domineering. When she was a young girl, she could be called sincere and naive. But now she was nearly 40 years old, and she was still so naive. Who could stand it? Not to mention the son-in-law, even she, as her biological mother, sometimes felt a headache coming on. The Sun Clan originally came back to complain. Who knew that before she could say anything, she would be scolded by her mother? She felt more and more aggrieved. Fortunately, she lay on the Arhat bed at the side and cried bitterly. Duchess Ding rubbed her aching forehead. Mother Bao immediately came forward, handed her a handkerchief, and patted her back. It wasn't easy for her to persuade the Sun Clan to stop crying. Mother Bao brought a bowl of warm water and served the Sun Clan to drink. Then, she stepped aside. Duchess Ding tightened her collar, and Mama Bao immediately brought a hand warmer over. Duchess Ding held the hand warmer and said slowly, "Tell me, what's wrong this time? What's the big deal that made you come back in such a hurry?" The Sun Clan sniffled and didn't answer immediately. Instead, she held Duchess Ding's hand. "Mother, please help me." Duchess Ding frowned. "What's the matter? Tell me first." I want to ask you to help me find someone. Who are you looking for?" I suspect that Qin Ming has a mistress outside." Finally, she expressed her grievances. The Sun Clan spoke faster and faster. "Didn't I tell you before that Qin Ming's aides found a child who looked very similar to Qin Ming near Liang City? Today, the child was brought back. I saw her. She was indeed as handsome as he was when he was young. Qin Ming doted on her so much. But I don't think that child looks like me at all. I suspect that Qin Ming has a mistress outside, and this girl is his mistress." At this point, the Sun Clan stood up and said through gritted teeth, "I questioned Qin Ming today, and Qin Ming was so rude to me. Although he didn't touch me, his eyes looked as if he wanted to eat my flesh raw. He treated me like this for a girl of unknown origin. He casually brought home a girl and said that she was my daughter. Do you think I have to acknowledge her? He's dreaming. I must find out." Duchess Ding listened to the Sun Clan's words and pursed her lips without speaking for a long time. Mother Bao, who was at the side, also lowered her head. She sized up Madame Sun from the corner of her eyes with an unreadable expression. Seeing that her mother didn't speak, the Sun Clan came forward and took her hand, acting coquettishly. "Mother, please help your daughter. Ask someone to investigate whether Qin Ming has a mistress or not. It's not like I don't allow him to have a mistress. If he really has a mistress, I must ask father to teach him a lesson. Also, I want to do a blood test with that girl to see if she's really my daughter. I can't just listen to what others say. Not only did you challenge the son-in-law, but you also want to investigate what mistress, and you also want to do a blood test?" Duchess Ding's voice was filled with anger. Hearing that her voice was not right, the Sun Clan was puzzled and aggrieved. "Yes, mother. Why are you so fierce?" Duchess Ding gritted her teeth and tried to restrain herself, but she still couldn't control her temper. She threw away the hand warmer and slapped the Sun Clan in the face. This slap was not heavy, at least not as heavy as when the Sun Clan slapped Qin Yining. However, the Sun Clan was spoiled, and it was rare to see Duchess Ding so angry. Moreover, she was almost 40 years old, and she was still slapped by her mother. She couldn't bear it in her heart, and the tears that she had just stopped fell again. She wanted to cry, but when she saw her mother's angry look, she didn't dare to make her angry again. She just knelt upright and sobbed, looking like a little wife who had been bullied. Seeing her like this, Duchess Ding became even angrier. She pointed at her nose and reprimanded, "Sister Han, you're not a little girl anymore. Why don't you have a brain? What kind of person is the son-in-law? Many people scramble to curry favor with him. How dare you quarrel with him? How dare you go back to your parents' home just because you said so? If you do this, where will your man's dignity go? You still want to investigate what mistress, and you also want to do a blood test? Do you have a brain or not? Anyone with a bit of common sense would not be able to investigate this matter. Not only can't you investigate, but you also have to acknowledge it. You have to acknowledge it happily. Why? The Sun Clan was furious when he heard this. He straightened his neck and said, "If that wild girl is a mistress, why should I acknowledge it?" Chapter 13. If you can't raise a son, at least you had a daughter before. If your daughter isn't even yours, you have to think about it yourself. There are 3 ways to be unfilial, and the worst is to have no descendants. You broke off Qin Ming's descendants, so you committed the 7 ways. Even if Qin Ming divorced you, your father and I would have nothing to say. Sun Clan was stunned by Duchess Ding's words. After a while, she screamed sharply, He won't dare to divorce me." "He won't dare?" Duchess Ding sneered. Looking at her daughter's stupid look, she was so angry that her head hurt. What kind of person is Qin Ming? That was an extremely talented and decisive person. At a young age, he was able to use tricks to get rid of the original Beiji Protector General. Later, he had a meteoric rise in his official career. Have you ever seen anyone in our Dian dynasty who entered the cabinet at such a young age? Hearing this, Sun Clan shook her head blankly. In her memory, there was indeed no man who had a smoother official career than Qin Huaiyuan. However, Sun Clan was still unconvinced. "That's also thanks to my father's promotion, idiot." Duchess Ding pushed her daughter's forehead hard, and Sun Clan fell to the ground. "Our family and family Qin are in-laws, so it's natural for us to mutually benefit and complement each other. If you always talk to the son-in-law in such a superior tone, not to mention the son-in-law, even I will be annoyed to hear it. The son-in-law is an upright person. Is it worthwhile for him to not even dare to bring back a mistress?" Sun Clan's lips trembled. Thinking of all kinds of things after seeing Qin Yining today, she murmured, "Is Sister Hui really my child? Was Sister Hui really exchanged?" Duchess Ding, who was originally in a rage, saw her daughter's sad appearance, and her heart softened. Her tone was much softer than before. "Since young master has said so, then the matter should be 80 to 90% accurate. Moreover, no matter who gave birth to the child, you have to acknowledge it, and you have to acknowledge it with joy. If you don't acknowledge her, you will become a sinful woman who has no children. If you acknowledge her, you will have another daughter and another layer of support. Do you need me to teach you such a simple truth?" Sun Clan's daughter's tears fell like beads again. She stammered, "I've raised Sister Hui for so many years. How could she become a fake? It's all Qin Ming's fault. If it wasn't for the fact that he had offended someone outside, how could the child have been swapped when he was still an infant? When you married Qin Ming and were popular, why didn't you thank him? Shouldn't husband and wife share weal and woe together?" Duchess Ding's mood, which had just eased a little, was wiped out by Madame Sun's ungrateful attitude. Madame Sun was taken aback. Then, she put on a strong front and said, "Anyway, he's in the wrong. Is it because in your heart everyone can't stand you? You don't have to tell me this. Just tell me, what are you going to do next?" Duchess Ding rubbed her eyebrows helplessly. Sun Clan's daughter thought for a moment and said, "Mother, why don't we secretly take some of that girl's blood and don't let anyone know that I once did a blood test with her? You see, at this time, we don't even need to test. Didn't I just say it? I've said so much. Was it all in vain?" Duchess Ding shrieked. Sun Clan's daughter was so frightened by her mother's rage that she shivered and lowered her head. "You should know the situation in Dian now. Your father, brother, and I have analyzed it more than once. De Zhou is getting more and more prosperous. Emperor Zhou is cunning, and Pang Zhishi is tyrannical and unrestrained. Our Dian is declining day by day. I'm afraid that we won't have a good future. At this time, it's time for our Duke Ding's mansion to cooperate with the family Qin. Our family and the family Qin can't have the slightest hostility." When it came to the serious national situation, even the Sun Clan's face became solemn. The Tiger Army led by little Wang Yi was like a sharp blade that was inserted into people's stomachs and was still stirring. They were stirring so much pain that they wished they were dead. It was as if every breath was waiting for the sentence of death. Sun Clan's daughter felt that her hands and feet were cold. Compared with the destruction of the country and the destruction of the family, She didn't feel that the sky was falling down when the child was swapped and found. Seeing that her daughter had finally calmed down a little, Duchess Ding also felt a lot better. She said in a slightly relaxed tone, "You should believe in Qin Ming's character. Maybe he will use tricks for other things, but when it comes to his own children and the bloodline of his family Qin, he will not allow things to be mixed up. You really shouldn't have questioned him today." Sun Clan's daughter thought of Qin Huayuan's flushed face and couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. Duchess Ding said again, "Sister Han, think about it carefully. Now that you have found your biological daughter, you have a sister Hui who has been raised for 14 years. If you have a daughter out of thin air, it's equivalent to having a good son-in-law in the future. Isn't it one more thing to rely on? For such a good thing, do you think it's better to have one or two?" Sun Clan's daughter thought for a while, and finally nodded obediently. Duchess Ding breathed a sigh of relief when she saw that she was finally no longer stubborn. In the face of her daughter, who was nearly 40 years old, she had to break down the truth. It was more tiring than taking care of her granddaughter. She could help the Sun Clan plan, but she couldn't accompany her for the rest of her life. Sun Clan's daughter was so old, but she was still so ignorant. What would she do in the future? Mama Bao understood Duchess Ding's wife's melancholy. Seeing that the matter had been discussed, she came forward and said with a smile, "My dear aunt, you must be tired today. I have already asked someone to prepare the courtyard where you used to live. You should wash up and rest first. How about we talk about the rest tomorrow?" Mama Bao was Duchess Ding's dowry. She had a high status among the servants in Duke Ding's mansion. Even the Sun Clan had to be polite to her. When Madame Sun heard this, she smiled gratefully at Mama Bao. Then, she looked at her mother, whose expression had turned ugly because of her anger. Madame Sun said shyly, "Mother, don't be angry. Your daughter will listen to everything you say." Duchess Ding shook her head helplessly and ordered Mama Bao, "Ask someone to send the ointment to Sister Han later." Then she said to Sun Clan, "You should also think of an excuse carefully. Go back to your house tomorrow and explain it to your mother-in-law." "What's there to think about? I will say that Qin Ming bullied me." Sun Clan's daughter snorted. Duchess Ding had the urge to hold her forehead again. "How can you say that in front of your mother-in-law? If I were your mother-in-law, I would make you cry. You can say that I was not feeling well and rushed back to take care of the sick without telling my mother-in-law. I came here at night." Sun Clan's daughter said unhappily, "How can I do that? Mother, you are not sick. How can you talk nonsense like that? Besides, the matter of me coming out is big. The second branch and the third branch should know by now. They will know that I am looking for an excuse if I say that." This stupid girl let the matter spread out. Duchess Ding felt that if she talked to Sun Clan again, her life would be shortened by at least 10 years. Fortunately, she waved her hand and shooed her away like a fly. "Go and rest. We can talk about the rest tomorrow." Sun Clan's daughter saw that Duchess Ding was really annoyed, so she didn't dare to continue to pester her and obediently left. Mama Bao instructed Mother Jean and Kai Lan to serve her carefully and watched her leave before returning to the house. Seeing Duchess Ding's tired look, she smiled and advised, "Madam, don't take it to heart. I've made a lot more progress than before. It's just that this matter involves children. Don't women care about their children the most? It's pardonable for me to do this." As parents, they naturally favored their children. Even if Duchess Ding felt that Sun Clan's daughter was really reckless and brainless, she felt warm in her heart when she heard Mama Bao's words. Sister Han is true to her nature. She has been like this since she was young. I just don't know if the family Qin people will think so. Speaking of this, madam, you don't have to worry about it. Mama Bao smiled and handed the exquisite white porcelain teacup to Duchess Ding. Look, our grandaunt has been married for so many years, but she is still so honest. It's enough to see that the son-in-law has protected her very well. Even the old madam of the family Qin is tolerant and gentle to her daughter-in-law. Otherwise, with grandaunt's intelligence, if there were really so many fights in the harem to train her, wouldn't she have become a master long ago? It seems that naivety has its advantages. At least it shows that grandaunt hasn't suffered much. Mama Bao was indeed the most capable person around Duchess Ding. After hearing her words, Duchess Ding felt as comfortable as if she had eaten a ginseng fruit, and the anger she had just felt dissipated. Duchess Ding thought carefully and said, I still need you to go with her tomorrow. Sister Han is wrong. Our family is not a family without rules. We can't not express our position completely. We also need to let the family Qin people see our sincerity. You go and explain it to Madam carefully and take a look at the two children by the way. Mama Bao nodded cautiously. I understand. Also, tomorrow you go and find out what happened in the Prime Minister's manor after Sister Yi came back. Pay attention to the reactions of Sister Hui and Sister Yi. Come back to me tomorrow when you have a clear discussion. I can also think of a way for Sister Han.
Yes.
Mama Bao's expression turned cold, and she knew what to do. Qin Yining was used to getting up early. She got up before dawn. After washing and changing clothes, she tucked her skirt into a towel and ran around the yard. Last night, Yu Xiang was punished to boil water. She didn't sleep until midnight. Ruelan endured the pain and served Qin Yining until midnight. They thought that the girl would be sleepy and couldn't get up today. Who would have thought that as soon as they got up, they saw the girl running around in the yard? How could a girl from a noble family get up in the morning like this? Ruelan didn't dare to delay. She hurriedly wiped her face, put on her clothes, and came out. She saw Qiu Lu holding a honey-colored cloak and waiting in the corridor. She smiled and asked in a low voice, "When did the girl get up?" "I've been running for about 2 hours." 2 hours? Ruelan carefully looked at Qin Yining. She found that her face was only slightly red, and even her breathing didn't change. She couldn't help but be shocked. This girl's physical strength was completely different from that of ordinary girls from noble families. After Qin Yining's exercise, her body was finally relaxed and tired. Seeing that it was about time, she asked Ruelan and Qiu Lu to help her dress up. Later, I will go to Ci Shao Garden to pay my respects to old madam. Ruelan and Qiu Lu looked at each other and were a little nervous. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.